Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the unofficial companion podcast to HBO Max's hit show Industry. I'm Jen.
I'm Kristen.
And we are back with season 4, episode 3. Now, please forgive me. I'm only a level 7 in Duolingo for German, so apologies on my pronunciation here, but the title of this episode is Habseligkeiten. And before we watched it, I actually asked my husband, who was born in Germany, what that word meant, because I assumed it was German. It looked German to me. And he said belongings. Now, the more literal translation that we get in the episode is beyond that, although he said also, like, based on, again, I think he did like a quick Google Translate and it said like the belongings of an almost penniless person. But I think it's really meaningful that there are themes in this of both A, who does or doesn't belong in which rooms, and B, what does or doesn't belong to each of our characters. So we will get a full explanation of what this word means in the context of the episode, but that was the background with which I was coming to this episode, and I think that it added a great deal of complexity to my reading of the episode.
Well, let me give you the background that I was coming to this from. So Jen had actually watched episode 2 and 3 before I did. And she was like, oh no, there's no finance in episode 2. And then she goes, oh my God, episode 3, there is so much. She's like, every single line is going to require a full-blown essay. So I was coming into this super fired up, super excited. And I will say this episode did not disappoint. All right. So the episode opens with Eric and Harper. And so Eric is looking in the mirror. He's fixing his tie. He's on the phone. And he says to someone who's on the other line something about some like bottle of wine that he had bought this guy. So
it's a bottle of scotch and it's called Lagavulin.
Got it. Well, regardless, there is a tag on the bottle that says Eric Tao back in the market. But we see who it is, and it was Hillary.
It's Hillary Wyndham.
Yes. Yeah. So he was Yaz's boss in season 1, who then turned, what's it called when you're
hypochondriac. Yes. He became paralyzed by COVID and then got actually sick and was written off the show. I thought he might have died.
But he, like, in that second season where it was basically a retelling of kind of what happened in COVID, he would have his mask on. He had his gloves. His wife literally got him a bronze bust with him with a mask. So it's good to see that he's back and on his feet again.
I love when they bring back people that they have seemingly written off the show.
And they bring back another person at the very end too, which that got me very excited as well. We then have Harper. So they're both kind of on their respective phones in their little, it's really like a hotel room, but it's functioning.
They're in a hotel room. It gives this feeling of, the old adage of the tech company that starts in, Steve Jobs' garage. This is the hedge fund starting in a hotel.
But it's like a super fancy hotel. It's like, yes, I love that. So we then see Harper. So she's on the phone and she's actually talking to our friend Jim. And so she goes, you can quote, Stern Tao's view is that the shares are trading above fair value and will stand to correct. And he's basically like, what the heck? He says, I have more valuable sources than your basically sad little fund. Like, I am not like your, he uses the term like cotillion. He said, my article is not a cotillion for your new venture.
What he means by that is I am not going to basically lend fancy credence to your half-baked idea for your barely nascent fund, he calls it.
Yes. But so he does say, look, I think they're processing porn and gambling payments in jurisdictions where I think they wrote legal, and I think he meant to say illegal. But anyway, this was the closed caption. He says, and using third-party acquisitions to wash them, even though Halberstrom has mooted and they may end up winding up those income streams. Harper says, are you going to call tender fraudulent or not? He says, I don't think I'll get the F word past my editor, meaning fraudulent. And then he takes some pill. I don't know that that's necessarily meaningful, but I feel like they never put anything in if it's not meaningful. So the fact that he's taking a pill, who knows? Maybe he has some kind of like psychotic issue. Who knows, right? So Harper then says, is there any chance that your piece does not go through legal? Like any chance that this is not going to air? And he says, no, the worst case scenario is basically the more alarmist language gets sanded down. I'm trying to get financial sign off from my editor for underground reconnaissance further afield. Harper then says, can I be blunt? So she wants to make sure that this guy is not trying to publish this for some personal gain, because she's like, I saw some article that you wrote about getting fleeced by FTX. I understand if you're looking for shortcuts, but are you short tender in a personal account? Are you doing this for some other reason? Like, what is your motivation for being so anti-tender? And Jim says, I'm rebuilding my life through honest work. I don't even have a trading account anymore.
Let's explain to our listeners who may not be familiar with what actually happened with FTX. So we're talking about the collapse of Sam Bankman-Fried's crypto exchange, FTX, in November of 2022. For those of you who are fans of The Big Show, we have a full feature-length episode about FTX through the lens of Going Infinite, the Michael Lewis book, where he talks about not only Sam Bankman-Fried's, rise and fall of FTX, but actually what predated that, his experience at Jane Street. And basically what happened is he founded a crypto prop shop in 2017 called Alameda Research, and then went on to found FTX as a crypto exchange 2 years later. And what he was convicted of was taking something like $9 billion worth of customer funds at FTX and using them to fund investments and losses at Alameda Research. And so both collapsed. And when they basically declared bankruptcy, it brought about the crypto winter. So if you were to have lost money in that, most likely Jim Dycker had a crypto trading account where he was storing money for transactions and trading actively in crypto. And when they went bankrupt, you became an unsecured creditor and just had to get in line. Yep. It's possible that he was invested in some venture that was invested in all these things, but less likely. It's not like FTX was a publicly traded stock or anything like that. So I want to be very clear that the mechanisms by which he would have lost money are very different than the mechanisms by which he would be trying to recoup those losses by placing a short in Tender, which is a publicly traded stock. Just a little bit of background for those of you who may not know. Sorry, we're going to have a lot of story time, dear listener, on this episode. So just bear with me.
So we're then now back with Eric in that other conversation. And so he says to Hillary, doesn't sound like you're on your way to our new investor breakfast, because he's obviously trying to get money for this new venture. And Hillary says, I would have been excited to come and listen to you. And then he sort of stops for a second. And Eric says, Harper. Hillary picks up the bottle of scotch and says, well, between you and me, the short only fund is a little high risk for us at the railway pension scheme. And so I do think that we should probably talk about this. The universe of allocators that this hedge fund could raise money from kind of starts with endowments, as almost seen as the most prestigious. So the Yale endowment, Harvard endowment, and actually foundations, they have a long-term investment horizon. You then have, say, insurance companies and pension plans, and then you have the family offices and whatnot. But in general, the endowments and foundations are going to have the highest risk tolerance and going to be able to do the most, whereas your pension funds are not necessarily. Because back to the point with these pension funds, there's almost two different buckets. You have what we think about in the United States, you see with, say, firefighters and teachers. And actually, this is much more typical in Europe, where you have is called the defined benefit plan. So you know that when you retire, you are going to be getting some fixed amount of money as an annuity every single year. And so if you are the pension plan that is funding that, you have to make sure that your money is not in some super risky thing so that you're going to be able to take that money out when you need it every single year. Versus something called the defined contribution plan. Again, in the US, that's what we think of with more of our 401k. As an individual, you put your money in and then you wait and you hope that the money grows. So Hillary is at, he says, the railway pension scheme. And so he's saying that this short only fund is a little high risk, which also makes sense. Literally one of the riskiest things you can do is short. You have unlimited downside. And so it totally makes sense. And if you want to talk, Jen, a little bit about just why this is so high risk. I mean, this is higher risk than I would say probably most strategies. I mean, maybe not, because it depends how much levers you're using, but this is a very high risk
this to me is the highest risk strategy conceivable, because to be short, and when they do actually use the language of what they're doing in their portfolio, to be short, we've explained this before, but it's funny. I've seen various posts on social media, people being like, I don't know what's going on in industry. And I want to be like, please just watch our show. You'll understand it. We have explained this so many times in detail on prior episodes, but if you're new here or you want a refresher, basically, to be short, you are selling something you do not own. And when you own something, especially in equities land specifically, when you own something, there is a floor on how low that price can go, and it's zero. In equities world, prices don't go negative. In interest rate world, rates can go negative. So you got to be really careful being short in interest rate world, because you have unlimited downside on both sides. But in equities land, stock prices typically can only go to zero. So when you are short, theoretically, a stock price can go infinitely higher. It can go to the moon, as we say. So to be short, you borrow shares of a company that you do not own. You sell those shares in the market in the hopes that the price will go down and you will buy them back at a lower price. But that price can go up infinitely higher. We will talk about a great example of a short gone terribly awry in just a little bit. And the risk is that you can theoretically lose an infinite amount of money. Also, because in the hedge fund world, shorts tend to be a little bit noisy, shall I say? And especially with shorts like these, where you're going so against the common wisdom, a short like tender on something that everyone is viewing as a growth stock, this fund is going to need to be really noisy to get this thing to blow up. So they are going to have to advertise their position. That's why Harper is not shy about going to the press and being like, we are saying that this stock is a short. Because the more noise you make about something, the more you can kind of bring about its demise. And so the risk is that when you've been very noisy about a short, everyone knows you are short and they can try to squeeze you. Meaning if someone comes in and buys those shares, it makes it much harder for you to hold that position.
Well, and actually, I think that there was a great episode that went through the GameStop saga. This was back, I think, in season 2. So it was called Short to the Point of Pain. And so you can actually see what happens when you are short something and people want to make you hurt. Because there is this other element I will add, and this is something that they don't get into here. I wonder if it's going to become a conversation, in a later episode. But there's a couple of things when you are short, there's like margin calls that can happen because the bank who is lending you this money wants to make sure that you don't blow up. So you actually might have to go back into the market and be a forced buyer. And so you sometimes can't even hold on to it. And by the way, there's then the retail element where there's like retail, buyers who can get in on like the Reddit threads, like Wall Street Bets, and decide that they want to squeeze whatever that hedge fund is. And basically, even if your position is arguably correct, blow you up. So it is essentially dangerous in so many ways. So definitely if you want, I would go back and listen to or watch the Short to the Point of Pain episode in season 2 to see where also this can go incredibly wrong. But
the old adage, what is it? It's the markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent.
Yes, exactly. So now we're back with the Harper conversation with Jim. And she says, well, if there's any more protein on the illegal payments laundering basis, I want it. And Jim goes, this isn't how this relationship works. Like, I'm not just your tip person. Now in the background, you also hear someone say, stop calling it clickbait and start calling it curiosity gathering. Jim then is like, hello? Because I think Harper has since hung up. Back to Eric. He then is talking to Hillary about his son at Yale, says he'll come back to you eventually. And as he hangs up, Harper says, do you believe that about his son? And Eric says, for a loan, yeah. Now, I didn't understand the for a loan because I thought they were trying to get money, but maybe he's just looking for a loan. So I was confused at that point.
No. He's saying, I believe that his son will come back to him for a loan because he's going to have this worthless degree in medieval houseplants from Yale and
got it.
a fuckboy, basically, and come back to Wendy for a loan.
Got it. I thought he meant that, like, Eric will lie to Wendy to get a loan from him. Your thing makes more sense. Okay. So he then starts to like walk back in, takes off his tie. And then Harper said, what is this? The Deadbeat Dads Club? She adds, I think this might be a little too intimate of a space for us to be working together because they are on these like different phones, but also like, that's kind of how the trading floor is. So like
100%. I wrote, they are actually working together beautifully here in this scene, right? That you have the alternating pattern of their conversation and they're each working to their individual strengths. Harper's chasing down her like dirty inside info, whatever she can do. And Eric is working his relationships in the industry and schmoozing, with the bottle of scotch. He's making his jokes. You've got the little tag on the bottle of scotch that says Eric Tao back in the markets. And it's like, yes, he's back in the markets investing, but it's also like, I'm in the market for investors. Like I'm back on the market. Like I'm dating, I'm single and ready to mingle. So they're in close quarters, but to your point, it's no closer than on the trading floor. It's just that when you're on the trading floor, you have the buffer of everyone else talking, all the noises, all the phones ringing, everything. So what they had was the buffer of everyone else to be that buffer between Eric and Harper. So Harper is left alone more with her thoughts and more with having to confront Eric and her emotions all too plainly versus what she's used to.
I will say though, I also agree. I mean, there's one thing when it's like a buzz of a bunch of people versus like you and somebody else both having, it's actually very distracting when you're trying to have a phone call and there's one other person. If there's 100 other people, it's so much easier, but one other person, because your brain kind of is like listening in on it and then you get distracted.
It's the difference between white noise and whatever the opposite of white noise is.
Anyway, so Eric then asks Harper who she was on the phone with and she doesn't answer. And he says the railway pension scheme was long nuts. Anyway, he says they don't have that kind of appetite for risk. The composition of our audience who's confirmed for the breakfast are family offices and high net worth individuals. And Harper then says, dumb money. And Eric says, you lead us off, I'll fill in the gaps. And this is where we get our hot pink industry appear on the screen. But that's also where you get the term dumb money. By the way, dumb money, it's funny because we talked about the GameStop saga. There was a movie made about that called Dumb Money, but it's more in the context of retail buyers, not family offices and high net worth individuals. I don't usually think of them as like necessarily.
No, neither do I. But to Harper, they are, because she's only ever been on the institutional trading floor. She would never have been dealing really with family offices on the floor of Pierpoint. The only family office she's ever really dealt with is Otto Mustin or James Ashford, right? Like these are, massive institutions. So to her, they're dumb money, but like to the rest of the world in institutional investing, I don't think they are.
The one thing though with them is they'd probably be able to write smaller checks depending. And so that's one of the other reasons why usually if you're like a hedge fund, you want to go to say like the Yale endowment because they'll write you $100 million check versus some like high net worth individual. I mean, I don't know. You don't want to get like a $25,000 check here or like a $50,000. You know what I mean? Like that's like, no,
yeah,
you want, even $1 million. You're kind of like, I don't know, 10 million. You're like, once we talk 25, 50. Yeah, exactly. So remember, by the way, her fund with Petra, they got a seed investment from Otto of, I think 200 million. And then
something
their fund was up to $1 billion.
Yeah. They raised money very quickly. She had it easy with Otto Mustin at her back. Now she's going it alone.
Yeah.
It's Lone Wolf and Cub all over again.
Yay. All right. So next scene, we're in the tender offices. We're in Henry's office and Yaz is kissing him very like intensely.
They're making out.
Very hot and heavy. Yaz is initiating it. Henry is he's going along, but he's not necessarily like comfortable with that. So Haley then comes in and says, I wanted to tell you that Jennifer Bevan's here. This is your 9 a.m., whatever. Yaz says, thank you. And Haley walks out. Henry then says, you can't talk like that in here because she was, again, being very suggestive. Yaz smiles and says, I can and I will.
I actually did not take it as him being uncomfortable at all with this in terms of the passion being back in their marriage. I do think he's kind of meeting her pound for pound on that. What I do think is interesting is that Haley walks in barely without knocking, clearly seeing them making out and feels no compunction about being like, hey, your 9 a.m.'s here as you guys are like, getting busy in your office. Whereas I think you would expect someone who's like younger, an executive assistant to like knock again, right? It's a big glass visual office. Yeah. You can clearly see what's going on. And she just barges right in. I read it more as him being like, hey, it's like, dude, like I'm trying to be professional here. Like cool that we have the passion back in our marriage, but like, this isn't the kind of behavior. Like I need to be CEO. Like I'm big, like blah, 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 Mr. Fancy Work, Henry.
And Yaz says, you need to focus on the societal benefit of the app. Financial well-being, but I also think that we should use this time with Bevan to highlight the muck renaissance. Men shouldn't feel a stigma when they talk about mental health. And Henry's just like, don't you think she's going to see through me, weaponizing my trauma? Yaz smiles and says, Henry, the narrative is important, which is going to be the theme. And we heard this last episode, and it's again this episode. People are going to narratize for you, so you need to be in control. She says that Jennifer Bevan, he assaulted her the last episode. He was, completely out of his mind on drugs. She saw you at his worst, and she's going to be feeding back to government. We need to build her trust in you. And Henry says, this isn't about me. This is all about getting the IBM Bauer merger over the line with the regulator. And so this is going back to episode 1, where we saw that Ferdinand dude, they said that they had a 6% ownership stake in Tender. And I think it was Whitney who made the comment, like, we could just buy them. Our market cap has overtaken theirs. So now it seems that has come to fruition and they are actively going to try to be buying this IBM Bauer. Yasmin is like, darling, you are the company. You're the head and the heart. It's all about you, which I'm kind of like, he literally came in yesterday. You could say that about him and say like Illumi. I'm not sure how much that's true about this company, but that's fine. And then Henry cradles Yasmin's face and says, I'd be dead without you. She smiles. And then we sort of hear this upbeat, almost like industry music that starts to play. So any comments on this particular scene?
Yes. When Yasmin says, you're the head and the heart of the company, I actually think that's a phrase we hear a lot talking about men and women in a marriage and how their roles are in the family. Like he's the head of the household and she's the heart of the household. And I think it's interesting that she is so passionately in love with him clearly, but only in the office, right? Like that their relationship functions best. And like she feels passionate, the sex life is back in the office setting. And that their relationship functions better when work is involved rather than he wasn't the head and the heart when they were at home, actually speaking, when he was going through everything that he was going through in the last episode. And then I do think it's important that Henry is saying like, hey, dude, like it's kind of gross to take my trauma, my actual suicidal thoughts, and my drug dependence and use it as a ploy for positioning. And there's this constant theme that we've had and will come up later about what people's trauma is and isn't used for, and how it's used either for them or against them.
Yeah.
And Yasmin's saying, look, I don't give a shit what it is. We need to spin it the right way. Because by the way, I learned very well through my trauma last season that someone else is going to tell my story, whether I like it or not, and I need to control that narrative. You need to do the same, Henry. Who cares if you were suicidal? Let's just like out it all there and use these tropes of mental health and stigma and blah, 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 blah to basically deflect and position you the way that you need to be. She feels very comfortable doing all this and has no moral compunction about it whatsoever. Henry is much more reticent and seems to have a much more, as you said last episode, where he like wasn't thinking about cheating her, where he was like his moral code, despite the fact that he's all over the place mentally, seems much more intact than Yasmin's is when it comes to his own trauma.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I think is interesting too is just Yaz being there in the first place and her just taking full control. And we're going to kind of see that she's sort of like brought in all these different settings where like you normally just aren't going to bring your wife. It very much felt to me like we work with Rebecca. So, you know, back to the Adam Newman, Rebecca Newman, trying to exert herself and put herself in here. So that's going to obviously like become a little theme in this whole thing. And like where she has the power, where she doesn't have the power, blah, blah, blah.
And does she belong there? Like how does she, what gives her the right to be in this room? It's pretty inappropriate.
Yep. All right. So from here, we then go to the next scene where they're essentially giving Jennifer Bevan a tour of the office.
While he's walking around, we see this neon sign in the background that says, "Your future is a mountain." And we saw it in the first episode when we saw Tender's offices. And it's like this like cheesy slogan that's lit up. I got this tip from the Bloomberg article I read that first pointed out Revolut as a comp. So apparently Revolut has a big neon sign, and I found a picture of it. Maybe we can try to splice it into this episode if we feel ambitious with our video editing. They had a big neon sign up above the desks in almost the exact same color and font that this does, saying "Get shit done," but the S and H were like dimmed. So it looks like "get it done," but it's like "get shit done." Like it's this mantra, I guess, that they had at Revolut. I don't know if it's still up or not.
Interesting.
But as we continue to go, all of my theses about whom this is based or not based on in real life will come together. And by the way, all of you sleuths out there who follow our YouTube channel and talk to us on Instagram have been amazing and so helpful in helping us piece this all together. So we're so grateful for you. Since this is not our wheelhouse, not only fintech, but UK and European fintech, we need all the help we can get because it's me doing a lot of Google searches right now based off some very tiny threads.
Awesome. So they're showing Jennifer Bevan around the office, and Henry says, "Tender's ambitions predate me. You know, I never made any attempts to cover up my failure at Lumi, nor have I oversold my successful, if short-lived political career." And then Yaz pipes in and says, "Jennifer, you surely know what it's like to live in the firing squad simply because you care enough to be engaged." Henry then kind of changes the subject a little bit. He says, "Yeah, you know what? If you want to talk about me, let's talk about me." He's sort of like, "I want to clear the air." He says,
and he takes off his glasses in this kind of like intimate gesture, like, "Let me be honest with you."
Yeah. He says, "I can talk about my profound struggles with mental health, my family's barbaric history. I can talk about the fact that I most likely wouldn't be sat here if my wife hadn't pulled me out of a pretty dark hole after the election." Jennifer says, "But your party consistently voted to underfund access to mental health on the NHS." And Henry says, "Yeah, and if you check my record, you'll see that I defied a 3-line whip to oppose that legislation."
And just one thing, I did not know what a 3-line party whip was. This isn't something that we have in the US. It's the strongest instruction of a UK political party that they can give to their MPs to attend a vote and vote the party line. It basically is, they can underline the vote once, twice, or 3 times.
Oh, got it.
And 3 lines signals maximum importance. So this is like a very UK coded political term that I did not know and had to look up for our American listeners.
Jennifer shrugs and Yaz says, "Jenny, you saw the worst of it." And Henry pipes in and says, "Yeah, I had to be told how appalling I was to you, and I've never felt such shame." Bevan says, "Henry, your letter said it all. I know the cycles. My brother had issues with alcohol. It's day by day." So they're clearly making inroads with her.
But I actually think it's important that she's like, "Yeah, my brother had issues with alcohol," meaning like that's kind of the line that they've told her is like he was an alcoholic, and he's like, "Yeah, anyway, he had way worse problems than alcoholism."
Well, I will also say, I mean, they're finding like common shared whatever, but like the fact that she also said it's day by day. If I were him, I'd be like, yeah, shit. I mean, it is day by day. I don't know if tomorrow's going to be okay. Like maybe you shouldn't be that.
100%. I think he's like, yeah, dude, like, I don't know if I'm going to be okay either, but like, it was a hell of a lot more than alcohol.
So Henry says, yep. Anyway, I want to make your voters' lives a little easier, and a banking license will allow Tender to do just that. He smiles and he says, but first, you need to let us buy this bank. And Jennifer says, the business secretary, so that's that woman Dern, is going to reason that Tender's merger with the European bank like IBM Bauer is anti-competitive. Consolidation of the banking and fintech sectors across Europe. Henry says, well, yeah, but we don't sell it to Lisa like that. We sell it to her and the regulator as the consumer be giving a fresh choice away from fossilized institutions and maybe even an opportunity for a post-Brexit relationship with the European banking sector. Jennifer says, we don't talk about Brexit. And so
that reminded me of like we don't talk about Brexit.
Oh, I was going to say Bruno. Henry then says, yeah, look, nobody believes that we can be the next Silicon Valley. Nobody believes that we can attract that kind of direct foreign investment because of your government's regulation. Every day for this past month, I'm working with our team. I've never felt more strongly that this is our chance to be a genuine leader in a new frontier. You guys can own it. Let Tender help you, the government, push through this merger. Like, let us help you. Like, let us help yourself help you. And then Yaz sort of is like looking to Jennifer, kind of like,
I see her like smiling in the background, actually looking impressed with Henry that he was able to like spew the party line that she wanted him to.
Interesting.
And so again, back to what plausibly could be our real world ties. So Revolut, which I mentioned before, they established a footprint in European banking in 2018 by acquiring basically a bank in Lithuania. So Lithuania had a very fintech friendly banking regulator, and Revolut got like a specialized banking license there in 2018. And they used that to then backdoor a European banking presence into a full banking license in 2020. This process is called passporting. And so through that, they can now offer banking services to all the member countries of the EU. And so remember, right, like for our American listeners, we say like, we don't talk about Brexit. It's easy to forget because I think we always think of, oh, well, if you open a bank in New York, you then can start doing business in New Jersey and North Carolina and North Dakota with just, you know, a little bit of paperwork here or there. It's not that big a deal. But post-Brexit, right? And actually, it's funny, we are, there's this whole internet trend that it's like 2026 is like 2016. It's easy to forget, but 2016 is when the vote happened with the referendum for Brexit, where the majority voted to leave, even though it wasn't fully implemented for several years after. But so if you're a UK financial institution, you can't just start operating as a bank in the EU. So that is why Tender needs to buy IBM Bauer. They need that to basically do this passporting, to backdoor into a European banking license so they can expand their footprint there. Otherwise, they're just stuck on this island.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. So from here, we're then back with Eric and Harper, and they're at this new investor breakfast. And so Eric is talking about their strategy. He says, we are 100% net short, fad sector losers, 5 to 10 core shorts with smaller satellite positions and sector overlay. Now, a woman at this breakfast basically pipes in and says, running that concentrated could get you taken out by one position. The market is way too volatile to be taking a large short directional bet. Short only, you've essentially given up before you started. Like we were talking about, this is so high risk. Harper then says, you see a market that only goes up. The family offices that you invest for, the clients that you represent, demand an uncorrelated return profile. And this goes back to what we talked about last week, which is like, as you're thinking about just the allocation of the various types of investments within a portfolio, you have equities, debt, and then this is that uncorrelated bucket. Eric then pipes in and says, I've worked with Harper for many years. That is a bone deep moneymaker. Now, that initial woman who spoke up says, I know her as the woman who petulantly gated her fund. Remember, she literally, like in that first episode, just spat off an email that was like, you can no longer pull your money out. And so that's not exactly a great way to make yourself known amongst this community as someone who could just like do that again. Now, Eric then looks kind of like down and kind of uncomfortably then over to Harper. And Harper says, or the woman who orchestrated her freedom. And the woman then says, well, tell me Stern Tao isn't just two people. Where's the team? Who's your trader? Someone else who we then later find out his name is Pierre. He says, in truth, I feel a little disappointed. I was very excited to meet you both, but you've either got a short that puts the cat inside the pigeon or you don't. And so I had to look up that term because I had never heard of it before. Apparently there was an Agatha Christie book, The Cat Amongst the Pigeon or something. And it just means to kind of cause trouble. But I was I didn't think
about that at all. I just thought, okay, well, listen, usually the cat is eating the bird. So if the bird were to be eating the cat, that would be like a miracle. Like, wow, this is a big deal. You really pulled a rabbit out of a hat. That's the phrase that I think we would use.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a French phrase.
Well, that's a good point. Maybe it's
that
international.
Is flipping things on its head, right?
Yeah. Well, apparently the book title is like The Cat Amongst the Pigeon. So it's also possible that it is a phrase in the French world. So Harper then says, who says we don't have that idea? And Eric just, again, he looks kind of uncomfortable and everyone is looking around. And then Harper says, Eric didn't misspeak about secular losers' broken business models, okay? Slightly sketchy management teams, fine. But my real passion lies with finding dead men walking, where the base case is a total reevaluation and re-rating of the equity story. We have our eyes on Tinder. And Eric then looks over because he had no idea that she was going to say this. And I don't even think that she had discussed this Tinder thesis. And the music kind of turns ominous here. And the woman says, the market is treating that as a growth stock. What is your thesis? And Harper says, we have fundamental misgivings about their core offering. Pierre then says, too high risk for such a generalized detail poor take. Pierre then looks to Eric, who again is like, oh God, this is not going well.
So just to be clear, Eric was talking in these like vague generalizations about the reasons why people get short. People get strategically short or underweight a sector, being like, oh, this company is like got some bad management. We think that this is worth, I don't know, 10, 15% drop in the stock price. What Harper is talking about is identifying opportunities like Pierpoint was, where it's like this company is going to zero because there is, and she calls them dead men walking. And that's actually not that I've been studying the previews for the show or anything, but if you listen to the previews that they've cut for the whole season, it's Harper saying to Yaz, you and your husband are, and then they spliced in this phrase, dead men walking. So I think it's interesting that they like cobbled that together. I don't know. Obviously I haven't watched the rest of the episodes, but I don't know that she ever says that line. Dead men walking, I think comes from this.
But yeah, so the main thing is they need to get money and like, does not look like they were getting any biters out of this. Everyone was just kind of like, this is a terrible idea. This is too high risk. You sound like you don't have a coherent thesis. I mean, right now they are not making any headway. So from here, we then go back to the Tinder offices and they're in a meeting and Ferdinand is talking about the merger. He says, on our IBM Bauer merger, the Prudential Regulation Authority is dragging their heels and has allowed quiet noise out of Vienna to develop into a bit of a den. Given the family voted in favor of the merger, I thought this was a non-issue that I could handle personally without reaching you. But the Bauer family still represents 2 board seats. Remember, for any kind of decision, there's a board vote that has to take place. Moritz and his mother have been audibly relitigating their concerns that they raised when they were negotiating. They now have asked for a sit down with you and your executive team. Whitney says that opposition is immaterial. There was a majority vote and Moritz and his mother voted to sell the bank. They are paid to have no issues. They are paid to shut the fuck up. And Henry is just like, well, we can't just kind of strike this hostile tone. The meeting with the regulator is tomorrow, and we need that banking license. Bevan is in hand, but Dern will be a harder nut to crack. But all of this is for the fucking birds, because unless the IBM Bauer merger goes through, then, I mean, we don't have a license. Like, this isn't going to do shit. He then asks, who's the agitator? Is it the son or the mother? Ferdinand says it's the son. Moritz's issue is security. He fears that the data of IBM banking clients is going to be targeted, harvested, and what have you post-merger. Their in-house counsel, Louisa, says that it's ludicrous. The anti-fraud systems are state-of-the-art, and they have an antiquated Austrian bank. So basically, it's like they're getting brought into something that is going to be more secure, and they're here whining about like, oh, we think that things are going to be bad, when it's like, dude, you're going to have beefed up security if you actually come aboard with us. Now, someone else says, didn't the Bauers, right, so the bank that they are trying to buy, didn't they finance the Reich? Ferdinand says they've given huge financial support to the Showa survivors, tens of millions. That was, again, just not a term I was familiar with. So it refers to the Holocaust, so Holocaust survivors.
It's the word that Hebrew speakers use to describe the Holocaust.
Got it. Whitney then says, my reading, this guy is an alpine fuckboy with an outsized sense of his own relevance and recourse. Yes, now she's piping in, even though like, I mean, who is she? She goes, sorry to add my voice here, but in my experience, testy family members respond well to a bit of FaceTime. Henry says, exactly. An ego massage. Supports scaffolds for delusions of his own grandeur. Working title for my biographer. Yaz then laughs, but sees that the rest of the group is not laughing. Like, this is actually a little bit uncomfortable. Henry then continues. He says, in all seriousness, we can't risk postponement or, God forbid, pay the termination fee if this deal falls apart. And now the termination fee is just if you've agreed to a merger and it doesn't go through, you basically owe a ton of money to the party that agreed to sell. And if you can't make it go through, even if it's like antitrust rules, you still have to pay. Oftentimes it's like 1% plus of the total amount of the deal. So, we've been talking about like this Paramount, Netflix, Warner Brothers thing. I mean, there's like a $5 billion termination fee. I mean, these can be really huge. But he says, I think if they've asked, we should all go. Multiple faces will make him feel important. Lend him our ears. Pretend we are listening and come back and deal with the regulator. Someone tries to push back and Yaz just says, no. It's his executive decision. And then one of the executives asks Yaz, sorry, in what capacity are you in this room exactly? Talking about how like, she does not belong here. This is just like her randomly here. And Henry says, oh, she's a paid consultant. We need her there. He then smiles and Yaz looks uncomfortable because like I said, she sort of knows that she doesn't belong. But again, I feel like she is Henry's kind of like courage, if you will. Like he needs her because he like without it, he is basically like a puddle.
She's his methadone, but she's also his Lady Macbeth. Like she is constantly pulling the strings on him, but he's completely dependent on her because I do think he was being very honest that without Yaz, he wouldn't be there today. So just to give a little real world context for this privacy and secrecy that the Austrian bank is demanding, I tried to do some research on this, and we can talk later about kind of the history in World War II if we want to, but there are a number of historically secretive private European banks that have had major issues with privacy and security. So the first one that I found was, and kind of I think like the biggest one, was the Liechtenstein Global Trust, LGT, which is in Liechtenstein, not Austria, but it's owned by the princely house of Liechtenstein. And its reputation for secrecy ended up becoming part of a global scandal in 2008. So basically, a former LGT employer, someone named Heinrich Kieber, stole data on 1,400 clients and sold it to German intelligence. And so what that revealed was that all these wealthy clients around the world were using LGT to hide assets. And they were also helping these clients set up foundations that were legal entities that allowed individuals to control money while technically not owning it, making those assets invisible to like the IRS, to tax authorities, right?
Yeah.
And then I guess a 2008 US Senate investigation described LGT's methods as something out of a thriller where they used code names for clients and had them using payphones to avoid wiretaps, and they were using transfer corporations to mask the flow of money.
Reminds me of like the Panama Papers type thing.
Ooh. So like, I don't know what the Panama Papers are.
Wasn't that, hold on, am I making that up? That was like a huge scandal.
I'm sure it was.
So the Panama Papers was this 11.5 million leaked documents published in 2016, detailed financial and attorney client information for a whole bunch of offshore entities. And again, it was like the same thing of they were
in
like
Panama. Interesting.
Anyway.
I do think it's important though that the bank is in Austria, and there were Austrian specific banking secrecy rules that were in place until like literally yesterday, actually 2016. Okay. So again, everything happened 10 years ago, but the Austrian Banking Act made banking secrecy a constitutional right. And this law was so strict that it required a 2/3 majority in parliament to change. And what it did is it effectively made Austria one of the last like tax havens in the EU. They had these Sparbook, so savings books accounts that were essentially anonymous. So even though those have been phased out, there is this, again, I'm just trying to think of things that are like lost on me as an American viewer that might be obvious to a European mind, if you will. Like this reputation for anonymity and secrecy has stayed with a lot of the high-end Austrian banks. So like this privacy plot line is very much like a duh thing in Europe that we necessarily wouldn't get if it was like, it's Regions Bank or like it's Fifth Third,
Well, because
like
I also think that you assume that it's
here in the US.
Yeah. But I also think that you assume that it's also like there is privacy with that, even here in the US. No?
Well, we have all these privacy laws here, but you can't open anonymous accounts. You can't.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
You can't be like, no, I don't know what's on that thing.
But also like,
I tried to close one of my accounts and they won't even let me close it because I opened it before I got my married name change and I need to show 85 different types of documentation just to close my own account.
But also like that's with crypto and stuff. I mean, like that's kind of serving that purpose that you can, I mean, the shadow banking sector that you are able to like have these anonymous payments and nobody knows who's paying for what. That's why a lot of the dark like the dark web and like some of the illegal activities get financed that way. So it is interesting that like here, this is in the traditional sector that it's all allowed. But again, in the US, we have it. It's like the crypto.
Well, and again, this has been phased out, right? So remember, this rule was phased out in 2016, long before, crypto became ubiquitous, right? Or as it was kind of just starting. So the two are not unrelated, right?
Yeah.
The idea that all of these old ways of kind of obfuscating fund transfers and things like that have fallen away. And now new ones have come up in their place. By the way, I still don't fully understand how people do everything illegal via crypto, because remember we talked to Steve Kurz, the co-CEO of Galaxy, and he's like, it's the blockchain. There's a permanent record of what you did and like where it was. I don't really understand it. So,
but I don't know if they like if your name is necessarily attached to it.
No,
like I feel like you probably well, yes, there's maybe that thing happens.
Your IP
like
address or whatever.
It's not. Yeah. All right. So from here, we then go back to Eric and Harper, and they're getting their Bloomberg terminals set up. And Eric says, that tender idea, that was just contrarianism, right? Or do you think there's a there? And Harper like puts down her tea and they go up and they walk into another room together. Eric says, I read that they're in the process of acquiring an Austrian bank. And Harper says, I got a tip that there might be more underneath the hood. And Eric is like, what do you mean a fucking tip? And Harper says, a journalist shared with me an unpublished hypothesis. And Eric is like, does his employer have enough cachet that the market will care? Or is this just a self-published scribbler? And Harper says, no, he works at FinDigest. And Eric is just like, why the fuck is he leaking that stuff to you? So clearly it's, again, the FinDigest is, I don't want to say prestigious enough, but it's like legit enough that he's like, oh, okay, this isn't like some just random dude. This is he says the ethical blowback for him could be huge. Harper says he's sending pre-publications questions to tender, but I don't know when he's publishing. How much does the stock re-rate when the market darling has been proven to be overvalued? Eric then says, well, the operative word there is proven. You can't kill a blue chip with 1,000 cuts from some reporter. Look at Herbalife. Looks like a pyramid scheme, smells like a pyramid scheme. Ackman, meaning Bill Ackman, intellectually lays out how it functions as one. Maybe that's the truth. But what good is the truth? You've got timing. You've got the Herbalife PR machine. You've got Carl Icahn talking up the other side of the trade. How good a storyteller are you? How long can you sustain the story? Without a smoking gun, you will lose. Ackman closed out his Herbalife position. He lost. So can we prove it? Short-only work is ugly, hard, investigative. It's anti-status quo, anti-establishment, anti-power. And Harper says, which of that is a problem for us? And so do you want to talk about Herbalife now or just finish the scene?
I would love to talk about Herbalife now.
Yes,
the baller line from Harper where she just goes, which part of that is meant to be a problem for us?
Yes.
Meaning like, fuck the institution, fuck the status quo, we're taking it all down. And remember, in the season finale of the last season, Eric was the status quo. He was the one that Wilhelmina brought in to give that speech because he represented the institution and the status quo, right? And then the institution turned around and stabbed him in the back. So now here he is, hand in hand with Harper, ready to burn it all down. I just absolutely love it. This scene brought me so much joy. But yes, so I spent my weekend watching the documentary.
Oh, you did?
On Zero. Yes. About Herbalife. I had hoped that this documentary would be about the Ackman Icahn battle. Yeah. It's not. It's really about like the poor people who were victims of Herbalife. And it's very moving. Just I watched this 90-minute documentary so that you, dear listeners,
so
don't
funny.
have to. But so, okay, let's talk about Herbalife. So Herbalife was founded by a guy named Mark Hughes, who called it at one point the goose that laid the golden egg. And let's go back to the early aughts. So Bill Ackman founded an activist investor hedge fund called Pershing Square. And he was very vocal about his views always and kind of pissed a lot of people off in the process. And very good at going on CNBC, talking his book, making markets move because he would get up and he would be so, compelling or persuasive or whatever have you, but like wasn't necessarily beloved by anyone. In fact, got to the point where he pissed a lot of people off. Very early in his career, he actually sued Carl Icahn, whom we will talk about in a minute, for $10 million, which for these guys is like me suing you for $50, Kristen.
I know.
And won. So that was in 2003. Keep that in the back of your mind. It's just a little nugget that he pissed off some very important, powerful people very early on in his career. So Ackman wasn't running a short-only fund like Harper and Eric are, but he did have one very public short that worked out very well, and that was MBIA, one of the mortgage insurers back in the global financial crisis. Now, that took 7 years to play out, but it was because of their exposure to the subprime mortgage market that MBIA went under. There was a Bloomberg reporter called Christine Richard who took an interest in the story. She ultimately published a book called Confidence Game about how that MBIA short worked out. And then she went on to be a research analyst at a short-only research firm. She called up Bill Ackman and she said, I think I've got the next MBIA. And it was this company called Herbalife. So Herbalife basically was supposed to be like a nutritional supplement company. But the way that it worked was basically instead of selling their products through retail outlets, they would sell through individuals as distributors.
So, but it's multi-level marketing.
It's multi-level marketing, which is not illegal, okay? Multi-level marketing is legal. But what would happen was they would show these videos of all of these Herbalife distributors who would be like, hey, I'm making $3 million. And this is in the 80s and 90s, okay? This was insane kind of money that they were making. And they would even make claims to people signing up to be distributors. Like your first year, you're going to make a minimum of $50,000. Year two, you're going to make a minimum of $125,000.
Wow.
And basically the way that it worked was you had to like pay $55 or $100 for like a startup kit. And then you'd commit to buying like $3,000 worth of product that you had to distribute. So the immediate spend to be one of these distributors was like, again, for your average person, a lot. But the only way that you made money basically was signing up more distributors under you, and you'd then be entitled to a portion of their profits. So the distributors at the top of ultimately they had 3.5 million distributors worldwide. Okay. Can you imagine that? 3.5 million individual salespeople. The top 50 of them were making between like $3 and $10 million a year because they had so many people rolling up to them. But all the people at the bottom were losing $20,000 or more of their own money. And it was really hitting hard. This is what the documentary mostly is about. It was hitting hard in underprivileged Hispanic communities where people were like sold this pipe dream of like the American dream and upward mobility. And a lot of them were undocumented and whatever. So anyways.
By the way, you know what that sounds like? It's like the modern version is, there was a reel I saw just making fun of this. It was like, I'm a millionaire because I have a course on how to make a course. You should take my course so you can make courses on how to build courses. So you can, and it's like the new multi-level marketing scheme is courses about building courses.
Yes. And by the way, this is what gives the word course a bad name. So if you guys have any brilliant ideas of what to call our self-paced academic curriculum, like I am all ears because I hate being like, we have a course that'll help you do this. It's like we have better than an MBA level curriculum that can help you learn all this shit. But anyways, so Bill Ackman basically like got a bee in his bonnet and started going after Herbalife and ultimately built up $1 billion short. Now he got short around a stock price in the mid to low 40s. And
this was in like 2012, right?
So yeah, he started what happened was in 2011. Again, we can get like way in the weeds here if you want.
It's
in 2011, there was like a Dutch ruling that it was an illegal pyramid scheme. And that was like the impetus that he was like, okay, this is starting to get international attention. We're starting to get some court rulings on things. But you remember like the Dutch court system is way slower than the US court system. So that was like an initial ruling that ultimately was overturned years later. So like it didn't end up being, but anyway, so he starts getting short. He gets short in the mid 40s. And like it initially goes well. It initially dropped like 34%, and he was on CNBC all the time talking this up, and he like dangled this short in front of everybody being like, I've got this great idea, but I can't tell you about it until he did. And then he like got a big auditorium and got all his investors out and had like this 300-page PowerPoint presentation, all this stuff. Right? And so it initially worked because again, his belief was that all of the company's revenues were just coming from distributors signing up more distributors, not from actual goods and services being sold, right? And that's the definition of an illegal pyramid scheme. And so when the stock went down, Carl Icahn, the guy who he sued in 2003, was like, fuck this guy. So Carl Icahn was like,
also an activist investor, by the way.
Yes, he was like old school corporate raider. Okay. So he was responsible for like TWA back in the 80s, I want to say. Princeton grad, philosophy major, by the way, for all of you who underestimate like the C-suite full of humanities majors out there. Okay. And when you walk around Princeton's campus, it's like, are we going to the Carl Icahn laboratory? Are we going to the Carl Icahn dormitory? Like he's, big donor at Princeton. Both Jewish, by the way. Which will come up. So he basically saw an opportunity to squeeze Ackman. So we talked about these short squeezes, right? He knows that Bill Ackman has this very loud vocal short. Carl Icahn comes in and first buys 13% of the company, then buys another 13% of the company. He becomes basically the world's biggest owner of Herbalife. And it's basically just a head-to-head against them. So in January of 2013, they fought live on the air on CNBC for nearly half an hour. And Icahn was saying things like, Ackman is a fucking crybaby. They were like, this is live TV. You can't say these stuff. He's like, I grew up in a rough area of Queens. We used to beat up on the crybaby little Jewish boy on the playground. Again, both Jewish. Like Icahn got a lot of heat for like these, anti-Semitic remarks on the air. And he basically was like, I should be thanking Bill Ackman for letting me buy this company at a cheap price. And like Bill Ackman was like, Carl Icahn called me and said like, we should reconcile. And Icahn's like, I never called you. I wouldn't invest with you if you were the last man on earth. Like going at it. And so they went to war. The stock doubles in price. Okay. So Icahn wins and wins big. And there were a bunch of hits, like Herbalife had to do this whole internal reform. They did end up getting charged by the FTC with both civil and criminal crimes. And they had to pay, I think, $200 million in settlements. But it was nothing compared to how much globally all these distributors had lost. And
I thought that also Dan Loeb and George Soros were rumored to be long as well. And that Dan Loeb joined the long side.
Hated Bill Ackman. And it's funny because the documentary was like, Bill Ackman was so great at going on TV and getting everyone to follow his ideas. And it was like, no, Bill Ackman, I think really believed in this and had a great point. You watch this documentary and you're like, there is no way that Herbalife was not an illegal pyramid scheme. But he pissed so many people off that basically just decided to go against him out of spite. And so what ended up happening is I think he originally sold, like I said, $1 billion worth. So it was 20 million shares at 45 on average price dollars a share. He closed out that short at a loss in 2017, but wasn't done. He converted it into puts. So he bought the right to effectively sell Herbalife at one price, hoping that it would drop to a lower price and those put options would be in the money. That didn't work either because in February of 2018, Herbalife announced this massive share buyback. They had great earnings. So anyways, he got out of the trade. Pershing Square lost something like $1 billion on the trade. And Icahn made $1 billion. Now, so Carl Icahn won that battle, okay? But he didn't win the war because eventually Herbalife, if you look at the graph of Herbalife, after this whole thing went down, it's it totally falls off a cliff. My guess is that Icahn got out of his long. But in May of 2023, remember Hindenburg Research, the short-only research fund that I told you about on episode 1? They came out with a report saying that they thought Icahn Enterprise was paying, because Icahn Enterprises, Carl Icahn's publicly traded fund, was paying Ponzi-like dividends and basically accused them of overinflating asset values. So talk about truth is stranger than fiction. Anyways, so really long story here. Sorry about the detour, guys, but I do think that this is potentially not an irrelevant story to know and have in the back of your mind in terms of how all this went down when we think about what we're setting up here in terms of the stakes.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So from here, we're then back in the tender offices and Henry gets news about this potential article. He says, hold on a second. Whitney, FinDi just sent pre-publication questions. Who the fuck is this Dycker guy and where is he getting this from? And Whitney says, yeah, that's just conjecture. So then Henry says, and I think he's reading something. He says, with these figures in mind, it cannot be ruled out that Tender continues to process illicit transactions, including gambling and pornography payments through African jurisdictions where such services are, and again, it said legal for non-residents. I assumed it was illegal. And it was just an issue with the closed captioning. Did you think the same thing?
Possible.
Doesn't really matter.
I 100% saw the same thing.
So he says, is he saying that we're being willfully blind to money laundering or is it intentional? Which is it? And Whitney says, all it demonstrates is his incompetence in reading a balance sheet with as many moving parts as ours. We are not giving this guy oxygen. You know why? More than likely, he's had some rogue, trumped up report slipped to him by an amateur short seller looking to make a quick buck day trading on our shares when this grubby little piece gets airtime. Henry says, yeah, but how can you be so sure? And Whitney says, I guarantee that he's talking to somebody in the hedge fund community, which, like, yes, he is. But it happens all the time in the retail space with celebrated stories. Fernando says, it's market manipulation pure and simple. There is no large institutional short base for good reason. Henry says, so what's our response? And then that woman, Louisa. She says, robust legal action if needs be. Regardless of their accusation, I will draft up an airtight response. And then somebody else says, their in-house legal counsel will be pushing back on this, a lot of pre-publication, meaning like this is probably not going to be where it goes out. So I think we don't engage. And then Ferdinand says, a story like this could threaten the merger. Moritz doesn't need another rock to throw. Henry turns to Yasmin being like, what do you think? Everyone kind of turns around like, why are we listening to her? And she's like, well, I don't have the qualifications, but I'd like to say to Whitney's point, a blanket statement. If they publish, the allegations are spurious, etc. And then the team all gets in an elevator and Haley goes to grab Yaz to ask to speak with her privately. So Yaz tells him that she'll catch up with them. And Henry says, plane sets off in 2 hours because they're all going to be going to Vienna. And then they go into the office and Haley says that she has a confession to make. I nearly slept with a journalist asking those questions. He followed me into a club and I fell asleep and don't really remember the play-by-play. Yaz is like, he forced himself on you? And Haley's like, no, not really at all. I mean, I was pretty fucked up. And she kind of is just like laughing about it a little bit in a way that normally it would be like, that's an assault. I mean, I feel like the definition in the US is like, if you are not able to consent, yeah, that's assault, but either way.
Well, yeah, she's kind of making up this story and then realizes that she's gone too far with what she made up, right? I think she was fully in control of her faculties.
Got it.
But what she has suddenly insinuated is that Jim Dycker raped her.
Yes.
And she's like, oh shit, gotta walk this back. I don't really remember. Maybe I fell asleep. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
But she slept with him. And remember, she was on top. She was in control.
Oh, yeah. So Yaz says, wait, so he forced himself on you? And she says, no, it's pretty fucked up. Yaz says, did you F him? Did you sleep with him? And Haley doesn't answer. She just kind of looks down. And then Yaz says, did you answer any of his questions? And Haley's like, no. So Yaz says, I hate when men try to take something that isn't theirs. And then Haley gives her this highly suggestive look that's almost so suggestive that even Yaz looks almost embarrassed, which that takes a lot to do. And as they're leaving the office, Yaz says, when we get there, feel free to explore Vienna tonight. Have the night off. And Haley says, well, I'm Whitney and Henry's EA, so I need to hear it from them. Yaz is just like, great. Okay. Because she's trying to, again, have control. And then it's back to, yeah, you don't have the power here. And so I feel like all these things are just Yaz being like, oh, I don't have the power. Let me take the power back. But
yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that Yaz says this line, I hate when men try to take something that isn't theirs. So going back to this theme of belonging. So now it's not just Yaz doesn't belong in this room, in this position of power, but this idea of men taking something that isn't theirs being Haley. Haley is something that doesn't belong to Jim Dycker. And then Yasmin trying to assert that she belongs to her, that she's the one who has the authority to give her the night off. And what a strange thing to say. Hey, you just told me how you were almost raped by this guy who's trying to find out stuff about our company. So why don't you go party when we get to Vienna? What? What a random thing to say. And when she gets that kind of demure smile when Haley's looking at her, that reminds me of the interaction that they had in the last episode when Haley's like, why don't I sleep in your room? And Yasmin's like, okay.
Yeah.
And she licks her lips, which also reminds me of her licking the blood off her lips in the end of the previous episode. So it's this very predatory move almost in the way that she's looking at her.
All right. So now next scene, again, it's literally everything. It's back and forth between Tender and Eric Sterntow. But so it opens with Harper walking into their office. And as she walks in, there's this 14-year-old girl who is clearly Eric's grown-up daughter. Well, not grown up, but 14-year-old daughter. And she says, are you her? Harper's like, who? And the girl goes, you. Harper realizes, right, that it's one of the twins. And so she says, Laura. And the girl replies, Lily. Harper says, damn, you're so grown up compared to what was in my head. Lily goes, you shouldn't really be thinking about me. I think because she thinks that she might be the person who her dad is sleeping with is why she's so upset by this.
Right. Are you her has two meanings. Are you the woman that my dad is sleeping with who has replaced my mother is the literal take. And then it's, are you her? Are you the one who my dad has effectively who uprooted my whole life, who upended my parents' marriage, who has wrecked everything. And now my dad has, Eric has chosen stern Tao over his family in a sense through all of the steps that have gotten him here. So I think there's
true, although it did bring him back to the freaking UK because he like went to, the US. And I think that, again, his kids were here in the UK. So it did bring him closer.
They have been there at a boarding school, but I don't think, he's trying to fix the relationship with them. We'll see. I don't think it's going that well. But I also think it was kind of self-referential here when she was like, wow, you're a lot older than I remember you, because they clearly recast these actresses, or it's the same actresses, but so much time elapsed.
Because it was filming. It was 2020.
They were like 6-year-olds. So either it's the same actresses and
it could be
just
the same
grown up because so much time has passed in real life. So I think that was the writers being like,
but think about your kids. It's funny, right? I had my second daughter in 2020. She's 5 now. Like she was literally 0 in 2020. She was a 0-year-old child, So it's like, it's just, I don't know, like time goes fast. It's 2026. Anyway,
right.
Never mind.
Right. But it's totally asynchronous with the time frame in the show.
Well, they definitely have had a little bit more like Harper should not be 30. We talked about that. But kids and time is freaking crazy. I literally I look at my little son who was, I just had him and he's almost 7 months. And I'm like, how are you so freaking big? Like time, when you have kids, time is fucking wild. So the fact that this child is grown, yeah. But anyway, Harper then, as Lily says, you shouldn't really be thinking about me. Harper rolls her eyes. And Eric then walks out, says to Lily, tell mom you enjoyed yourself. And Eric then hands her money. Laura says, I did. Well, mostly. And then they go and they kind of awkwardly say goodbye to each other. And Harper then says to Eric as they go and they sit down together, Eric says, having a twin who's better at stuff like sports and socializing fosters a bloody resentment of the world. Harper says, who knew? Eric asks, you have siblings? And Harper just gives him a look because remember, she does have a sibling. She had this whole fucked up thing with her brother who again,
Please
they are
don't
twins.
bring this plot line back.
I know. I don't think that they're bringing it back in any real way. It's just showing that they didn't really know much about each other, except for obviously Harper knew that she had girls and he didn't know shit about her.
Correct.
Although, it was DVD that I think Harper had talked to about her backstory. Mm-hmm. She then says, I got somewhere with the brokers in trading lines. I spoke with Kenny. This is my favorite fucking whole dialogue. So Eric goes, oh, Kenny, Goldman still? I'm not sure how we feel about covering me since I fired him. Harper replies, Deutsche Bank. Eric says, fuck, ouch. I hope he didn't fall off the wagon. I was dying. I sent you that. It was so funny. It's like, oh yeah, he's at Goldman. It's like, no, Deutsche. Oh, wow. Did he start drinking again? Anyway. So he then notices something and says, your 3 p.m. is here. And we then see Sweet Pea come in. And Sweet Pea's looking around. She says, oh, is this your setup?
That's just pretty wild, right? You're starting a hedge fund out of a hotel room. I think that it's just
Harper does everything out of a hotel room. She lived in a hotel in season 2. She moved back into a hotel in season 3. it is so on brand. She met Jesse Bloom at the hotel room in season 2. I feel like Harper, that is her home. So she then says, Eric handles the overhead. It's mostly club sandwiches and fries. How's Mostyn's? Sweet Pea says,
I love a club sandwich, by the way. May I just state for the record, it is the supreme form of food. Whenever I go to hotel, I am constantly looking for a club sandwich on the room service menu. It is my favorite thing in the world.
What is the definition of a club sandwich?
What do you mean? What is the definition of a club sandwich? It is 3 pieces of bread, and you have typically turkey, bacon, lettuce, tomato, mayo, maybe mustard. It's so good. A hard-boiled egg, a little bit of avocado can do wonders for this thing. It is the supreme form of sandwich. It is basically if a Big Mac were a sandwich. The Big Mac is the club sandwich of burgers, and the Big Mac is my favorite burger. Sorry, I feel very passionate about club sandwiches, and I just need to state this for the record.
This is just a random memory. My mom would never let me get McDonald's, and your mom always would. And I used to love to go over to your house because your mom would get McDonald's and you would get Big Macs, and I was so jealous. And so I loved to go to your house to get Big Macs when I was little. That's all.
Now I know you were just using me for my McDonald's.
For your sandwiches. Yeah, seriously. So Sweet Pea then says, the misogyny swings between patronizing and lecherous. And this is where we find out about the OnlyFans stuff. She says, well, it's my own fault. Harper's like, no, it's not. That siren link was not your fault. You did something for you and some asshole made it not for you. I hope he fucking suffers. But the whole point here, right, is that this goes back to that first episode about, who has the agency with this porn conversation? Is it the woman who is doing it to make money? The Harper, I love a woman who doesn't leave money on the table, or the more traditional view until I feel recently where it became prostitute is sex work and it's the empowering, but is it empowering? And that whole thing. And here, to your point, we had said this before, clearly, I think the answer for Sweet Pea is actually no.
Well, and in Harper's words, Sweet Pea has made something with her body that belonged to her and men took it and made it something that belonged to them. or at least not to her. So what does and does not belong to women, especially with respect to sexual power, just power in general, is being woven in here as a theme as well. So I think you're 100% right. I don't know if we're going to get more info about who leaked this.
My suspicion would be Rishi, but like.
So that's the thing. And I didn't want to spoil what's about to happen, but I think we are given room to think that it might have been Rishi in a moment of vengefulness. But I watched this thrice. Yeah. On my second reading, I was like, wait, was it Rishi? On my first and third, I was like, no, I don't think so.
On my first watch, before we even see Rishi come in, I thought it was Rishi. And we'll get to what happens. I think that she thinks that he murdered his wife, and that's why she's so like horrified when he comes in.
Yes.
Not because she thinks like if he leaked it, I don't think she knows that. I don't think anyone knows that it was him. If it was, I think that this, like, my assumption is that it was because he knows, and he was like super down on his luck. They fucked him over. It's like, if anyone's going to do that, I could see it being him.
My read was exactly the same. But it just didn't cross my mind until I saw him. But to your point, I think we're given that opening, maybe just through like our obsession with the show. I don't know that everyone else has this read. So dear listener, dear watcher, if you feel the same way or don't, please let us know. But I don't think it's obvious.
Yep. All right. So then from here, it just sort of flashes to a few minutes later. But Sweet Pea is now handing Harper a physical marketing deck and says, Tender's IPO deck from a few years ago, compared to their annual report. The euphemism they use about the kind of payments they're processing. Emotional content is porn, gaming is gambling, and clearly that is a key source of revenue for them back when they did the IPO, but then again over the next 5 years. The EMEA, so EMEA, which stands for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, for people who are not familiar with that term, the EMEA region is maturing into a key driver of their growth. This constant erratic evolution of their strategy isn't even slightly reflected in their projections. So much risk basically is not baked into the share price. You then hear in the background, Eric's just like, "Hey, sweetie."
I think he's like calling for the bathroom.
Probably. That's very fair. Because I feel like it's
so funny. I love domestic Eric. Domestic Eric
I do too.
Cracks me up.
I agree with you 1,000%. So Sweet Pea then continues. So if your thesis is correct, they're going to continue to process illegal payments, even though they've made overtures that they're stepping away from this as their core business. And she says, I mean, in any case, it's primed for a mega correction and re-rating. Harper says analysts are recommending 25 buys and 2 sells. So again, the analyst is the sell side research analyst who cover the company. Sweet Pea then says incentive in group think. The star fintech analyst at MS, so Morgan Stanley, he just upgraded and a group of smaller places followed. The market's reading Muck's appointment as a positive catalyst, not sure why. But I think actually one other quick thing on this too is that when it comes to like sell side research analysts, we've done a lot of episodes on sell side research. I feel like, again, they should not have buy-sell recommendations. It should just be like, this is information about this company, because most banks tend to publish buys, period. Like there's really, buy or holds. Like there's really no incentive if you are a sell-side research analyst to publish a sell, because it's going to potentially be harder to get business for the banking clients, even though they are technically and legally 2 separate divisions, and the analyst view should not influence the bank's fees, but they do. And we actually did like a whole deep dive on this in season 3, episode 3, where it's the COP conference. I think the title is called It, but it's basically like the ultimate recommendation that this sell-side research analyst puts on at that point, the Lumi company after the Lumi IPO, and ultimately tanks the stock price. But regardless, I feel like so much in terms of like exuberance for stocks and all that is so much driven on like the mob mentality. And so in this case, though, the sell-side research analyst, they're publishing mostly buys, showing that there is very strong support for this company, and people are looking at this as a growth stock, and people are not bearish on it at all. I'm honestly surprised that there's even sells at all. I would think that it's like 25 buys,
taking the opposite side. I think what Eric is implying though is that Henry has this whole machine behind him between Lord Norton and Otto Mostyn. So when they say nobody wants to get in front of a moving train and nobody wants to get off it when it's full of cash, it's not just, it is in part about the momentum of the sell side research analysts and this group think and the herd mentality and all that fun stuff. That I think there's this nefarious implication behind it, because anyone who sees like, hey, disgraced addict, failed CEO now in place, why is this a positive catalyst? Well, when you have the moving train full of cash, AKA the Mostyn Norton empire behind you, all of a sudden it's very hard to be a contrarian.
But I also think even with something like, say, like Tesla, for a long time, people were like, the valuation here makes no sense. But it's like, if you shorted it, I mean, all these people are along for the ride on the upside. Why are you getting off that money train? Like, if you want to short it, even if the fundamentals say that you should, I mean, all these people are on the money train, like keep going up. Now, at some point, right, is it possible that it's going to go down? Sure. But again, this is the whole problem with shorts is that when things are working and you have buyers, like when there's more buyers than sellers, the price goes up. And there was some great quote at one point. Oh, we were talking about like algorithmic trading and AI colluding with each other. And it was like, you typically think company has good fundamentals, so like price goes up. But really it's just when there's more buyers than sellers. And like, again, your AI can decide we want to buy because, I don't know, the CEO likes to eat a club sandwich, right? So it's like, there could be
good reason in my view.
I mean, seriously. But anyway, Harper asks Sweet Pea to come on full time. And at that point, before she can answer, there's a knock on the door. Rishi comes in with a giant box, right? Likely with documents and stuff. He goes, he puts down the box, and Sweet Pea looks like totally startled. And she goes, stay the fuck away from me, honestly. And then Rishi's like, look, I'm not staying. But Sweet Pea turns to Harper and Eric and she says, you're working with this piece of shit? This guy is a fucking liar and a fucking pathological degenerate. I have every horrible detail. He's a fucking murderer. So that's why when I saw this, my read was that she believes that he actually killed Diana.
Yes.
And it has nothing to do with the potential that he leaked it, even though I think he probably did.
Again, I'm still not convinced that he did. I don't think we're given to anything there.
And so as she walks out, he screams, I'm not a murderer. And Sweet Pea says, if you put me in this room with this man again, you will never hear from me again. But as we know now, I think that to me, this did set up a little bit because they're like, where's your traitor? And I'm like, hire Rishi to be your traitor. And this is basically saying,
I thought that's what they were setting up. I had hopes that they were going to bring Rishi on. But I will say that this brings me back to our conjecture about what had happened with Rishi, where people were like, oh, I think I recognize your face. And we had wondered why he couldn't get a job anywhere and couldn't pass a cursory background check. So it sounds like the details of Diana's death were splattered all over the tabloids and the headlines, that Rishi's name has been everywhere in the press, that he was a suspect in Diana's murder. And even though he wasn't obviously convicted of her murder, that he has been convicted in the court of public opinion. And that is why he is persona non grata. And Sweet Pea is siding, Sweet Pea is the kind of voice of morality in so many ways throughout the show. And she's like, dude, porn is okay if it's for you. It's not okay if it's for someone else. And don't murder your wife. I don't care if you got exonerated formally in the courts. I'm going to suspect you of this forever.
Well, there's a little bit of parallels with the Yaz story last season, where it's like Yaz was in the press. They assumed she was part of the embezzling nonsense. She could have been in the press for a possible murder as well, but she was not.
But she was not. Yeah, she got away with that.
Yeah, she got away with murder. So from the next scene, we were at Vienna at the Moritz Castle, and we hear this like regal upbeat music with trumpets and all that. And you see Yaz, Whitney, Henry, Ferdinand, and Haley, and they go into the castle, and Moritz and Ferdinand greet each other. And then Ferdinand starts making introductions. So he starts with Henry Muck. And Moritz says to Henry, I think we have mutual friends at Winchester. For every genuine homosexual, 9 are created by British boarding schools. So like interesting way to start off. He then introduces Yasmin, and Yasmin says, I also do some comms and consulting for Henry's office, because she's trying to again like justify why she's there as like Henry's wife. Moritz then introduces his mom, and the woman is very welcoming to Yaz. And Henry then says, well, look, we're here to assure you that we'll be dutiful custodians of your family's bank. Moritz interrupts him and says, part of the depredations of neoliberal late capitalism is that there is no central authority to appeal to, just a patchwork of economic zones to facilitate capital flight. We will be subsumed unhappily and say, oh, it's the free market. This was supposed to happen. Whitney says, well, even Tender doesn't want you to be unhappy. Moritz says, let's save this conversation for dinner, yeah? And Princess Johanna, his mom, says, oh, what a splendid idea you have to the son. And then she says to everyone else, allow me to show you to your rooms. And then they all say, fantastic. Now, I did want to let you pipe in with the Halberstrom.
Name. So first of all, we are reminded of Whitney's last name here. And thank you to all of you who follow us on social media and who subscribe to our YouTube channel, because 2 of you reached out to remind us that I was so remiss in my American Psycho reading that I forgot that there is a character who is named in American Psycho named Marcus Halberstrom. And at one point, somebody accidentally calls Patrick Bateman by his name. And it's like he's so pissed off, but the whole thing is like they all look the same and you can't tell them apart and they're all really the same person. But so I was very happy that someone made that. I was so caught up in being like, am I pulling on this thread and am I totally wrong? I didn't even bother thinking about it more. And I mean, totally missed it. A+. Thank you all so much. But Whitney's last name will factor in. Somebody else had reached out being like, do you think it's coincidence that so many of the male characters have unisex names, have kind of female names? You've got Aubrey, Whitney. There were a number of others.
Well, we just had the very beginning of the episode, Hillary Wyndham.
Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of these names. I live in the South where everyone has unisex names. A lot of the women here have traditional men's names. We actually went to a magic show last night and they called someone up on stage and he was like, yeah, I'm here with my 3 kids. I'm here with, I forget the names. It was like Andy, Logan, and Colt. And the guy was like 3 boys. And he's like, no, 2 girls and a boy. And the magician was like trying to figure out which was which because it's the South. Mm-hmm. And so I'm so used to that. Whitney to me actually reads as a very Southern
female
name for a man. So if you think of Whitney or Whitner from Southern Charm, which I'm sure you watch,
I do.
it is like Whitney is like an old South male name. In the Northeast, I think is traditionally coded as a female only name, but in the South, it is very equally unisex. But I did notice that pattern. Thank you to dear listener who pointed that out. I don't know what to make of it necessarily. And I certainly don't know how these names are coded in the UK.
Right. That's a good point. So next scene, we are back at the Eric Harper Stern Town.
The offices
of Stern Town. So, but it's like nighttime and you hear her like trying to like call and reach someone. And it just has this like sad hold music. It's like, sail away, sail away, sail away.
It's freaking awesome. I love that song.
It's not the song, but it's like the idea of being on holds indefinitely because you hear like,
good
continue to hold.
And I think it's no coincidence that Sail Away by Enya, again, classic. All Enya songs I feel like are making a big comeback, which I'm very happy about. But she lists off a number of different countries. I didn't write them down, but if you ever listen to the lyrics of the song, she does list off all these countries, like from Milan to blah, 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 the Isle of whatever, Tripoli. So like, I do think that there is overtones of Tender's globalist ambitions to be read into the fact that they chose this as their music.
Got it. So Eric then walks in asking Harper what she's looking for. And she's like, I don't know. I've tried to call 4 of these payment processors they acquired in Africa. And every time I was put on this eternal fucking hold through Tender's fucking Dublin call center. The voice comes back on. It's like, hello, you've reached Tender. And Harper's just like, oh, this is endless. And she like hangs up the phone. Eric just laughs. But Eric says, Pierre called. Good news. He thinks Tender is at the very least toppy. Bad news. He wants quite specific terms and structure. So it sounds like they might be getting an investment from this Pierre dude, but the structure of the terms is potentially not great. He wants a first loss arrangement. Pierre acts as a guarantor. I put up $10 million of my own money, so Eric's own money. He puts in 90. But the first 10 million, if the fund loses it, is my 10 million. And, depending on how the position performs, I might have to liquidate my family offices and my girl's inheritance. Harper says, I would never ask you to do that. And Eric says, well, I don't really see where that leaves our little venture. We don't even have a trader, for fuck's sake. Again, they literally just had Rishi there. Then he says, maybe get the fuck out of here for a bit. Harper says, but I want to work. Eric says, I've lived a life where everything's work and I've lived a life where everything is leisure. I'm telling you, for a few hours on a Tuesday, there's a middle ground. And then he walks out and then Harper basically takes her cigarette and puts it out. But it is back to what we see on the prior episode with like this whole idea of, work and like meaning. And Harper doesn't want to leave. Like she wants to be doing work. I will also add, it's a Tuesday. I feel like it should have been like on a Saturday evening. Like she should be going out, but a Tuesday evening. Okay. Like you work in finance. Like, all right. But anyway, thoughts, impressions?
Well, I just want to make sure that all of our listeners who aren't accustomed to hedge fund payouts and structure remember how hedge fund fees, payouts, and investments typically work. So you'll hear a lot of talk about waterfalls and thresholds and carry and blah, 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 blah. But basically, the way that it works is most hedge funds collect a 2% management fee. So if you have $100 million, they are collecting $2 million.
Good funds.
Yes.
I will say. These days it's a little lower, but yes. Continue.
They are collecting $2 million every single year just for having your money with them and all the work that they're doing. And then any returns that they make above and beyond that, they are charging you 20% of those returns. There is typically something called
hurdle.
Thank you. So they first have to overcome some minimum return and then above that get that. But we haven't talked about losses at all and how losses are distributed. And one thing that was really interesting about the Herbalife short is that Bill Ackman actually said, hey, listen, whatever personal profit I'm making off this, I'm going to donate to charity because I believe in this so strongly. But you can't donate your clients' money to charity, okay? Like you can't take all their profits and donate it to charity. That's all that they want. But I mean, they lost $1 billion on that. There were moments where they were down $400-500 million at a, just awful, right? They had $1 billion of capital to play with and they lost it all. So I do think it's important to think about what this would mean. If this $100 million investment is their only capital that they're playing with at this hedge fund, that the first 10% of losses are Eric's only to absorb, not the investor. And again, they only have one investor on the hook at this point at all, but it would be Eric. And it's very easy to be down 10% on a short. It is very, very easy for that to happen because it is a levered position implicitly. And it's very easy for a swing of that magnitude to happen, if not a much greater swing. So Eric is saying, if you'll recall, he got $20 million in cash from his Peerpoint exit. So I think he's saying, hey, listen, I might be forced to liquidate my daughter's entire inheritance to backstop this. So we now know what's at stake for him. Yeah. And here he is. He's back in London. He's trying to make things work with Harper. And he seems to also simultaneously be trying to make things work with his family. But it's very clear that he is much more deeply emotionally invested to making things work with Harper than he is on focusing on his daughters. And he's giving them cash, kind of like, I think the stereotype of like the rich dad who's like buying his daughter's love, being like, hey, here's the cash. Go tell your mom you had a good time. Okay. Even though like we clearly like don't really know how to make this relationship work. And he's showing that he's so committed to this fund. What we're seeing is this tension of will they, won't they with Eric and Harper? Will they be in this as equal partners with equal emotional and financial stakes? Or is Eric coming 90% and Harper only going to meet him 10% of the way? And I think she is like, dude, I am fine with the boundaries we had. Let's only play with other people's money. Let's not mess with this. I would never ask you to do that, right? That's not, and he's like, no, but I want to.
Well, I mean, to him, the stakes are not as high as they are for Harper. Like he was retired, but I also think he wants to do this. He was miserable. Even though I do think it's for her, he's doing this as much for himself. They both need this.
But I will say, I think they set up these stakes to show that it's not just like, hey, I'm doing this for fun. And if it goes wrong, no harm, no foul.
Exactly.
It's like, if this goes wrong, I'm sacrificing my family's future because that's how much I need this.
Yes. And it goes to the same thing of like why we needed the whole prior episode. Like you had to have the stakes for what was on the line for the Henry Yasmin duo for Tender, and then what's on the line for Eric and Harper. So in both of them, it is not just work. It is so much more. Again, with Yas, it's life and death. And then in this case, I mean, the irony though, I'm like, even if you did lose it, you still have $10 million. Like, I think you'll still be okay, but whatever. That's all right. So from here, we then go to the next scene, and Yaz is in her room and she's looking at a picture or a painting of some castle. Now, Princess Johanna comes in and says, I just came to settle you in. I hope you feel comfortable. I put you in my favorite room. It's full of, Jen, say the word because I can't say it.
Habseligkeiten, I think. My German pronunciation is not great.
Habseligkeiten. So Yaz replies in German. She says, my German only goes so far. I had a German nanny for a while. Remember that woman, Teresa, had a daughter who's her half sister, whatever. Princess Johanna replies, well, literally translated, it means possessions closest to your soul. Yaz then says, it's beautiful, right? Meaning the word. And then she says, in German, and so is this room. Princess Johanna says, well, if you need anything, just let me know. And Yaz says, thank you in German. This woman seems like this like lovely, nice, kind, like so interested in the well-being of Yasmin, like giving her all this courtesy. But again, this is literally the name of the episode and is going to come back in a very real way. Jen, anything else on the...
No, the only thing is I had wanted to mention and forgot in the previous scene, or maybe I did and I forgot, but the last scene we have with Johanna, she is playing this almost worshipful mother towards her son. Like, oh, such a good idea. I'm so glad you thought of it. Like, very deferential to him and making him seem like he's running the show and that she's like, just in the background. I am just waiting on everybody. I'm showing them to their rooms. We will later see her being the one who's serving everyone at dinner. She's demeaning herself in all of these social cues to make us think that Moritz is the one who's running the show here.
Yeah. And it's, again, it's the same as Yaz and Henry. Like, it's the same dynamic,
Well, I think that Johanna is the master and
Yes.
Yasmin is the student in terms of
Fair.
making it seem like you
Oh,
are
yeah.
not the one pulling all the strings.
Oh, yes. But Henry cannot do anything without Yes. And again, this woman.
She is straight out of central casting from like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yeah. So from here, we're then at dinner with Maritz's family, so his mom and the tender executives. And Maritz says, I admire the UK system and the pendulum swings, of course, but at least you don't muzzle insurgents. Yaz says, your mother tells me you were a bit of a historian. And Maritz says, most of her political quagmire can be answered by the early modern period. And that's why my political hero is Louis the 14th. All answers lie with the Sun King. And we can talk a little bit about that in a minute, but Henry just laughs. He's like, I'm sorry, I don't think I've heard anyone ever say that. Whitney laughs too. And Maritz says, well, anyone with eyes can see. This is, by the way, the same like son. Maritz
and
says,
dead serious, by the way.
Dead
He's
serious,
like,
yeah.
I wasn't joking.
Oh, yeah. He says, anyone with eyes can see that Western liberalism has failed. Decades of political gridlock, partisan divisions accelerated by social media, a short-term policy driven by a need to win elections. The most successful central government in the world today functions as an absolute monarchy, and for that, it calls itself communism. So, China. Princess Johanna then pipes in saying, Maritz, this isn't very riveting conversation for dinner. And she's also, again, to your point, she's pouring them wine. And Yaz is like, oh my God, Johanna, sit down. You don't have to wait on us. And she says, please, this is an absolute privilege. So Yaz then says to Maritz, I read your Substack. And he says, oh, I'm flattered. Fragmentation and the acceleration of atomization. I'm like, what the fuck is that? He says, it's killing us as a species. At first I was like, is he writing freaking things about like physics and stuff? But anyway, he says, take any successful corporation in America. They're not a collectivist enterprise. They're dictatorships. And again, at first I thought this was a criticism. And then I realized that no. He's saying this as a compliment. Like basically we should be more like that instead of making it like, this is so terrible. They're dictators. No. He's like, we need to be more like that. Johanna then sits down and she like opens her napkin like very forcefully, signaling like she wants him to stop talking about this.
Chill out. Yeah.
Yeah. And Whitney says, well, then why do Foxconn and many industrial parks need worker suicide nets? Maritz says, all I'm saying is that they are not democracies. Maritz then pipes in again. And he says, although for me, my politics and my business are one and the same. What you see as protectionism, isolationism, I see as respect for tradition. IBM Bauer is a 300-year-old institution. I'm concerned that this merger represents a threat to our customers' privacy. I do know how fast and loose modern fintech companies play with their customers' data. I am speaking with some other person on the board to ensure the merger, gets the scrutiny that it deserves. You think because I'm a small individual voice, the weight of your capital would bury me? And Whitney says, you voted for this and you'll be compensated incredibly well. Moritz says, it's always money, Mr. Halberstrom. And he kind of like says it very like
he
pointedly.
says Halberstrom, not Halberstrom.
And does that mean something in German?
No. So when the ST sound in Yiddish, which is the Germanic language, is pronounced with the sh. So the shushing sound cues that he's pointing to the Jewish origins of Whitney's last name.
I totally missed that. Interesting. Okay.
So he's implying that Whitney, you're a Jew, and therefore it's always about money. This is just straight up naked anti-Semitism.
That makes sense because they do mention the anti-Semitic reference later. And I was that was it. Got it. So Johanna says, Maritz, it's enough said. And Maritz says something in German. He says, I never mean to embarrass you. And then she knows, I know my Schatz or whatever she says.
Mein Schatz. Yeah,
yes,
my dear.
So clearly what we're seeing here is that this guy is like a fascist. Let's go back up to the Louis the 14th reference. I have some notes, but again, you always do a better job, so I will let you. I didn't. So basically,
I thought this was self-evident, but I actually don't know. Let's go.
The saddest thing is I got like a 5 on my AP European history exam, and I remember none of it, so I had to look this up. Apparently, he became king at age 4 because when his father died, he was too young to rule. His mother basically served as like the regent power at the time, so it was a very Game of Thrones, Jordan. Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. What was the name of the horrible guy? The absolute worst character. Joffrey. And I guess that during his childhood, France was thrown into this civil conflict. This was, 1643. The nobles and the judges rebelled against the royal authority. And this scarred Louis and essentially then later shaped his obsession with absolute control.
Yeah, so he consolidated power and became just like this ruthless, dictator, effectively.
But to your point, he became obsessed with absolute control, built Versailles, fought numerous costly wars like the Spanish Inquisition. And so the point, though, is the fact that this guy is pointing to him as like, all answers can be found with this dude. Oh, okay.
Well, and the show always tends to be prescient in my mind. This was written before, I think, so many of the conversations being had today about how now modern political pundits are looking to some of the, I think, most universally ill-regarded leaders of the past, certain dictators, warmongers, evil dudes, and being like, I think they were misunderstood. And it's become this like transgressive thing to say. And this guy is coming out here and saying it out loud in the context of having this broader conversation about the UK imposing its laws around what is and isn't okay content on the internet and what is and isn't okay speech in our first episode that led to Siren obviously being the target of Harper's initial short. Now we're seeing this guy saying, I don't know, authoritarianism seems pretty great. Like, shouldn't we all be more like Louis the 14th? Shouldn't we be more like China? Like all these things. Foxconn, for those of you who don't know, is like the company that makes iPhones.
Yeah.
So,
in China,
hear about like the child labor that goes into these things, and, these workers throwing themselves off buildings because they're so miserable. And it's like, oh, but we should really look to that as the model of like how to run companies. It should just be this authority.
Countries. But yes. So the next scene, they're all like Whitney, Henry, and Yaz are in a hallway outside of their rooms. And Yaz is arguing that we have to be practical and humor him. And Henry is like, there's practicality. And then there is acquiescing to a tin pot tyrant. Yaz says, fine, he's an intellectual dude. Henry's like, no, he's a fucking fascist. What about that thinly veiled anti-Semitism? So I had missed that point about the way that they said that. And Yaz says, that's not what that was. Whitney says, for someone whose last name is Hanani, you seem pretty relaxed. And then he's like, we're flying out of here as soon as possible. So I had asked you, is Hanani at all Jewish as well? And you had said that.
I had looked it up based on this because I just read her name, Kara Hanani, as referring to like the Levant in general. I didn't know whether it had any specific regional ties or anything like that. So apparently Hanani is a Hebrew word that then also it can be in both Hebrew and Arabic texts. So like it could be read either way. But I think the more literal interpretation of Hanani is like blessings or grace. And Kara in Turkish languages means dark or black. So I was like, oh, is her last name like Dark Blessings? Like the dark inheritance that she has been given through all that she has been blessed with in terms of her privilege and position, which is something we probably should have looked into in episode 1, and we're just lazy. And we were like, let's explain finance.
In episode 1, I'm not sure they thought this was going here.
Most faith in the creators that they thought about everything. So I'm going to give them credit for all of this. And again, this is just based on my Googling. These are not languages that I am intimately familiar with.
Yeah.
But I think that the reading of this is supposed to be, hey, you have Jewish roots in your last name as well. You shouldn't be so glib about this guy being openly anti-Semitic at the dinner table.
Yeah. So Yaz says, I don't think it's a very bright idea to just abandon the problem and hope for the best. Henry says, but we can't be a no-show tomorrow with the regulator. We have to fly out first thing. So Yaz says, okay, well, I'm staying. But we obviously see that, again, Whitney and Henry are like, we're out. We're not dealing with this dude. And Yaz is like, oh no, I'm going to make sure that I'm able to essentially save this deal for you. Even though it's funny. Like, it's like for Whitney, this is a bridge too far. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny. With Whitney, I can't really tell how seriously he is, or I think he's just like, there's always a way. I'll figure it out. But Yaz is like, no, I'm going to make this work. And to circle back to what we were talking about earlier, this history of the Austrian banks is supposed to be very coded as, hey, these guys were in bed with the wrong people. So in World War II, after Austria was invaded by the Nazis, the Reichsbank seized all of the gold and foreign reserves of the Austrian National Bank, and they moved it to Berlin to basically like fund the war. Jewish citizens were forced to declare all their assets. So basically those were then frozen in their bank accounts and transferred to the Nazis. And Austrian banks acted as informants for the Gestapo, like basically monitoring the accounts of Jewish citizens who were attempting to flee and reporting them to the authorities to ensure that that wealth got confiscated before they could leave. So for Whitney, whose last name is his last name is coded like, Rothschild or Warburg as like one of these old Germanic Jewish names. So him in kind of like the lion's den here in this house that is very friendly to authoritarian regime. What we're supposed to read into this is how comfortable are we cozying up to people who are sympathetic to the inheritance of the Nazis, basically.
So the next scene, we're back with Harper. She's sitting at a restaurant. She's by
swapped
herself.
her Chinese restaurant for sushi.
Yes.
She used to only go to Chinese restaurants.
She's checking her watch and Kobina walks in, clearly late and profusely apologizing. Harper says, I've been sitting here for 15 fucking minutes. And Kobina says, bro, like, calm down. And Harper just glares at him. And then she gets her jacket to signal that she's like leaving. She's had enough. Harper says, I'm trying to build a business. I don't have 15 minutes. So in the 2 that I plan to stand here, I might as well tell you I fucked somebody else. And he says, in the last 15 minutes, remind me never to be late again. And she just like looks at him.
Funny.
And he says, were you going to tell me that before I was late? Is it even true? And Harper says, are you not sleeping with other people? And he says, no, not as far as I'm aware. I thought we were just hanging out, which actually sounds like the opposite of like, I'm not sleeping with anyone. But actually, that's like such a thing where it's like, I am sleeping with other people. And like, we're just hanging out. We're not actually serious. So I was a little confused with that. So Harper says, but do you like me? And he says, you make it pretty fucking hard. But yeah, if you'll let me. You're a tiny bit too punctual, though. It's my only note. Reminded me of Aladdin, by the way, you know, when he's like trying to come up with a compliment to give to Jasmine. And she says punctual. I remember as a kid not knowing what that meant. Harper then says, because she sits back down and she says, be on time. I have a job that I left to be with you. And Kobina's like, so leave it there. Try separating church and state sometimes. It's easier. And Harper then just gets up and she's like, yeah, fuck this. I actually came to offer you a job. And Kobina's like, really? And Harper just says, maybe this relationship is better done over email. And she just like marches out as he screams after her, Harper. And I actually I kind of understood that. It's like when you were on a deadline being like, I don't want to go do this thing. And now not only am I going to do this, but this person is freaking late. Like, I actually really hate when people are freaking not on time if you're away from something that you need to be doing.
I think that this is a physical representation of what Harper is dealing with emotionally by letting herself be vulnerable with Eric and with Kobina, which is, okay, I actually like you. I think she really does like him, but you made me wait, and now I'm nervous that it means that you don't like me and you aren't taking this seriously. And like, you know what? I feel so vulnerable and exposed. I need to push you away first, meaning if I hurt you first, you can't hurt me. So that's why she's like, I slept with someone, you know, like trying to hurt him and like throw a dagger. And he is so patient and so kind and so gracious. And he's just like, dude, if you let me like you, I can.
I know. Yeah.
And she's not sure how to feel about that. And this to me is exactly what Eric is doing as well. If you let me in, if we know more about each other, if we become more vulnerable with each other, all these things that she and Petra were saying to each other. If you remember in the last episode, she had said to Petra, like, why don't we become more vulnerable with each other? And they were both like, yeah, sure. And couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But Harper is trying to figure out if she can kind of be a real human being and be in a relationship with this man who clearly loves her, who is so lovable, who's so likable and adorable and funny. And she's just like this immature child almost like, meh.
Yeah. I really love Kobina. He's the best. But so now we know that he is the one, not Rishi. I mean, obviously, again, we know that it couldn't have been Rishi, but he's the one who she's going to try to bring on as a traitor. So anyway, the next scene, she marches back into her office with Eric, walks over to her Bloomberg, and he asks how it was. She doesn't respond.
Remember,
which, by the way, Eric, to Bloom. Like, that's how they met in like season 2 was them sitting there in their robes, like getting a freaking hamburger at the bar.
Remember Eric in his robe with Robert at the hotel.
Oh, yes. But I will say, it's funny, like him being in that robe, because he says, do you mind? Like, is this good for you? You mind me being this casually dressed? Like, I wasn't sure if they were trying to make it that like he is being a little too casual, because to me, I didn't read that at all, because we literally had seen Harper like swimming with Jesse Bloom, having them go into each other's bedrooms a lot, being in the robes together. Again, like nothing ever obviously happened with them, but it was like she's been very much in that kind of position throughout her whole career.
But not with Eric, where Eric is showing her his vulnerability. He is being like, hey, roomie, you know, like, it's cool, right?
He's being like Rob. Yeah.
Like, like it's besties doing a sleepover together. And she's like not ready for that level of intimacy with him.
Yeah. But anyway, so Harper says, don't be so fucking weird. He says, hard-coded, I'm afraid. And he says, I followed up with the rest of the family offices. And in truth, I had to chase. A few eyes were on stalks I didn't understand this again. I like saw this.
Like bugging out of their heads. Like people's eyes were bugging out of their heads.
I see.
You suggesting Tinder was anything other than a sick
I thought it was supposed to be STOCKS and it was like a transcription fail, but got it. Okay. So a few eyes were on stalks, like their eyes bugging out of their heads, that Tinder was anything but a blue chip safe haven. Harper says, I dropped Tinder to be spiky and controversial in a meeting that I thought was headed south. It's going to take labor, sweat, and turning stones and fucking time. She then takes a drag of her cigarette, and Eric says, I have plenty of time. Harper retorts, if that's all you have to offer me, I think we should reevaluate what's going on here. And Eric is just like, why are you being so sharp with me? Back to the same thing that how she was with Kwabena. And she then says, because this is not some recreational fucking game or some lame extension of your retirement while you're floating around trying to rehab your life. Or cosplaying the roles that you've spent your whole life ignoring. Basically, like you were ignoring your daughter. Now you're cosplaying basically being the father figure with them and then also possibly even her. Eric says, you seem a little triggered is all. And Harper gets so triggered by the word triggered. She goes, who the fuck uses that word seriously? Are you kidding me? My own trauma made me stronger. No, my trauma fucking traumatized me. It made me weak. And I've had to deal with the consequences that were not my fault. And it has nothing to do with what I am doing right now. Do you want to know why I do this? I do it because I enjoy it and because I'm good at it. It starts and ends with work and being proven right. She then takes a deep breath. She says, this is life or death for me. You used to act like it too, which actually kind of reminded me a little bit of the like episode we just saw with Henry, where like it like
Yes.
actually was life and death, but
Yes.
she feels like it's life and death as well. He says, okay, I can act like it, but I need you to come to meetings that I spend days wrangling with ideas that are not half-baked, being like, dude, I am putting everything on the line and you are also kind of sabotaging this too. This is a two-way street. Yeah. Harper then sits down and she says, did you know I'm a twin? Eric says, no, because you've never mentioned it. And then Harper just kind of shrugs. Eric says, I did a cursory Google. A good percentage of the addresses and contact numbers of these acquisitions that are listed to the same place, the Dublin call center. Plus, I'm not sure it's anything altogether incriminating, but I did notice something in the documents. It's printed small, but in every 100th page or so, there's a care of address. Google Street View looks like, sort of want to use the term shithole. Eric takes out his phone and he shows Harper this like sad office door. He says, does it look like a satellite office of a company with a $9 billion market cap? And Harper says, who, what, or where is Sunderland? I had to look it up because I didn't know where it was. It's like, I don't know, apparently in like the northeastern part of England. Harper picks up the phone, calls Sweet Pea, and then says, field trip? I think this might satisfy your curiosity and I need your expertise. So we now know that there is potentially some sketchy stuff going on and Harper and Sweet Pea are going to go on this little adventure. But let's back up. Where do we start?
I think this conversation about Harper's trauma is really interesting in light of how Henry talked about his trauma. His life or death experience, he was coached by Yasmin to use in this very manipulative way to paint the right narrative about himself and to weaponize that trauma to make the right narrative about him as CEO within the company of Tinder. And Harper continues back to some of the things we've loved about this character all along, that she's never the victim. Whatever her trauma was, I guess her stuff with her brother and all that stuff that we've left in the past, it's, hey, listen, it has turned her into this person who is going to push people away at the first sign of love or trust or true intimacy. But she's not going to use that for some other narrative other than what it is and who it has turned her into. And it has turned her into this person who is all about the job. There is no life for Harper outside of the job. She's confronting that. And she's having to, by being in this office where she's just, it's just her and Eric, she's alone with her thoughts, she's alone with her emotions, and she's forced to confront all of them through the lens of Eric, who is going on his own journey. They're going on this parallel journey of like, can we be normal people? Can we be together? Like, can we make it all work? And so I think this is her coming to grips with the idea that she could potentially open up to Eric, to Kwabena. She could have a life outside of work, but she doesn't want to. That's not in her nature. That's not what she wants to do. She wants it to be all about the work. Fuck all this other stuff. Fuck how you made me feel. I don't want to confront any of that. I just want to be right, because that to me is true emotional fulfillment. It's having that edge and being proven right. But we'll see if she actually can do that. And we'll see if maybe she can let all these other people in just a little bit. The only person she seems to be really letting in is Sweet Pea.
Yeah, this is true. Okay, so the next scene is like this weird thriller sex scene. Long story short, Haley shows up at the door because she says that she has like these different versions of the Findesk article. And Yaz is like, well, you could have emailed them.
The rebuttals. Yeah.
The rebuttals.
Say in response.
Exactly. And so Yaz calls her Calabasas, which I was trying to figure out where that name came from, because in the prior episode, we saw her in a Northwestern shirt, which is like in Chicago. And so the only things that I could think of, and I didn't know if you had any ideas, is
The
like, I don't know if you're, well, the Kardashians, yeah. But I was like, we don't know that she's even from California. So is this just because she's American?
I think I took it as short code for like, she's kind of got this Valley Girl way about her in her speech and stuff like that. So I thought she was like, oh, you're acting like one of the Kardashians, because that's the only American reference that I have, like culturally, you know what I'm saying? If we were to call some British person Bridgerton or something like that. But I have not had the plot note about her being associated with California in any way, shape, or form. So I thought it was just like calling her Yankee, but not Yankee. Like, yeah.
Well, it's funny. I like looked up in ChatGPT. I was like, is there any reference? And it was so funny how it gave me like 4 wrong things. And I was like, this is wrong. This is wrong. It's like Harper has a client named da-da-da-da, and they are from Calabasas. And I was like, no, they don't. It was just like so wrong. So anyway, essentially Yasmin orchestrates the threesome, but Henry seems like, I don't want this. Like, you're enough for me. Are you sure you want this? Making sure that Haley is consenting to this. Because I mean, by the way, he's her fucking boss. He's the CEO. Like, this is so not okay. But Haley is, I mean, she's been almost like going out of her way to kind of lay the groundwork.
She's been the one who seems like she's been initiating like a throuple with them the whole time.
Yes. But I will add, the way that Yaz approaches this is so back to like season 1 Yaz of taking her power and ordering them both around. And at the very end, Henry, he has sex with Haley. And for whatever reason, it very much felt Handmaid's Tale vibes for me. Like, I wasn't sure if after the last episode, it might have been because I literally watched those two kind of back to back. We recorded the season 2 2 days ago, and then now we're doing this one. But and then she also makes some comment to Haley after Henry finishes having sex, which is like, you have something that belongs to my husband and therefore me, which I thought, like, if there's a baby, like, it's my fucking baby. But I will add one other thing that is totally, remember we were like, what is this commander thing? So Max Minghella was in Handmaid's Tale, and he was a commander in Handmaid's Tale. So I was like, again, that could be totally random, but commander is such a specific word. And it's like, they chose to use that word. So I don't know. That's why I was like, are they laying hints about something with a Handmaid's Tale angle here? So
that's for those of you who haven't read the book or watched that TV show, what you're implying here is that Yasmin is orchestrating Henry impregnating Haley because she doesn't want to have this child that Henry has suggested that they go on and have. By the way, that's entirely possible. The mechanics, again, this is very like not PG-13, but the mechanics of actually like what happens here would suggest that she's not after a child at all.
They do have sex. They have like normal sex.
Yes.
Haley and
after that sex immediately.
Yes, but that's Yaz. Yaz, like, she's part of this whole threesome and all that.
I think your reading is very astute. I'm just saying that, again, the actual mechanics of going about it are.
Well, but again, like, because this whole thing was literally seeing them sleep together, and then her comment, you have something that is mine. And then it just sort of like was weird sex HBO, you know. Like,
they immediately cut to Yasmin slurping down oysters and burping slightly, which I do not eat oysters. And I will say after this, I will never eat oysters again.
Yeah, again, I was just like, oh God, this weird sex scene. You literally, Jen, because she watched it first, she goes, it's a great episode, except for there's this only one disgusting sex scene. Or I forgot what you wrote. You have like one gross sex scene. I forgot what you wrote. Anyway.
But I will say also, when Yasmin, during the sex scene that she has orchestrated, she is like smiling, welcoming, like
in the
totally
beginning,
endorsing it in the beginning. The second Haley and Henry start hooking up, she drops a smile immediately, goes and sits there with her cigarette, ordering
and just like
around.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because she had seemed like she was excited about it, but then has this very matter of fact, almost.
The music totally changes, and literally it goes from this sound that's like this music. It's like do 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 do, and then it literally cuts to him having sex with her. It's filmed upside down, And Yaz just like, get off of her. And then is like, turn around. And like, but it to your point, they signal that with the music
sinister.
too. It is. Exactly. It was just like, and I do think there's a little bit back to this whole thing where she has no power. Nobody knows what she's doing anywhere. And it's like, she's ordering people around here. You told me that you need to like get permission to take the night off. I'm going to now order you around too, Haley. Like, you know, she's taking that power back, just like she did with freaking Robert in season 1 with some, again, also like disgusting scenes that we were just like, oh yeah.
Right. Oh, well, this is an iteration on that same sex act. But yes. So back to our title, belongings. So now we have this thing, whatever it is, whether it's the inception of a child or whether it's just Henry's manliness, if you will, that belongs to Yasmin, that she's staking a claim to and asserting that everything belongs to her and she belongs in this room and she's the boss in the bedroom. But it is also weird too, because in any other situation, it almost feels like she's creating like damning evidence against, like, this is the kind of stuff that you feel like is like blackmail against the CEO. You're putting him in this super compromising position. Yeah. Why on earth would you do this to someone who we know is hanging on by a thread, who has indicated no desire to step out on their marriage, who in fact says, you're enough for me, you're all I want, who hasn't indicated, other than in the court of public trial where he was indicated to be this like lecherous person who took advantage of his assistant. Yeah. What was her name? Katie. Yeah. So if you'll recall in season 3, he was accused of taking advantage of his assistant. That was the thing that like ultimately got him taken down. So why on earth would Yasmin now be knowingly putting Henry back in that same situation that was used to like besmirch his and I will say, right, in season 3, we didn't really know the type of person that Henry was. I will say, again, throughout last episode and then this episode, you do see that he consistently like wants to be doing the right thing, whether it's in his marriage, whether it's like, you know, like call the freaking police and get me like at least, you know, some concept. Like he seems like he has a good moral compass. And so, yeah, I'm with you. It was the commander being the devil on his shoulder in the last episode, telling him, move towards suicide, move towards this darkness. And Yasmin, the angel, being like, no, live, go pursue this role. And now it's like Yasmin's the devil on the shoulder being like, no, why don't you have a threesome with your assistant? Like, why don't you get in bed with this Austrian bank that like clearly supports authoritarian regimes? So she has now become the commander who is commanding everyone in this little situation. Back to your point about potentially that Handmaid's Tale reading. I'm now like so curious if they do end up like somehow Haley gets pregnant. They have a kid. And just they did it with like we have been so disciplined. It is taking every bone in my body to control myself to not. We have not watched ahead. We have not watched ahead. So you are getting our real reactions, and if we are wildly off base, we will totally own it. Yeah, seriously. But I'm annoyed because like if we are right, I'm annoyed that people are like, well, you just walked ahead. It's like no, we did. I do think we have it so frequently because they have been having actors like the fact that they were in prior works is a message about something. You know what I mean? So that's why I was like, I wonder, because literally freaking Max was in this other show. It's his other big role that he's known for. And he's freaking commander. That's literally his title. So anyway, back to Yaz at breakfast the next morning, meeting with Johanna, right? The guys have flown off because they're going to, you know, have this meeting with the regulator. And Johanna says, let's go out for a walk. She also says, by the way, like the men have abandoned us, right? I've been abandoned with you. Like we're just here. It's the 2 girls. The men are doing all the hard work. It's just us ladies. Let's go out and take the dogs out with a walk with the dogs. Like we're the lowly servants just doing this menial labor while the men are out having all the big ideas. Yeah. So Johanna says Moritz's name on the family bank is no more than an honorific, really. And he knows that the tender deal is a good deal. He just craves attention. He doesn't want to be defined by his name only. And Yaz says, well, I mean, I could speak to one of Alexander's editors. I will make Moritz feel like the world's actually listening to him for once. And Johanna's like, oh, that's such a wonderful idea. I think seeing his work valorized by a Norton masthead would give him meaning to see his name printed black and white. And Yaz says, I mean, legacy media still has weight. And Johanna says, yeah, the weight of history. He has a way for not couching his views for polite company, but the general direction of travel of his thinking is ungirded by common sense, wouldn't you say? And at this point, Yaz just kind of burps and she's like, She burps again, as she did after this oyster scene. Like, again, this theme of indigestion or rather digesting everything she's doing is playing out quite literally here.
Yeah. And then from here, which is sort of part of the same scene, you see her go back as she's packing up. She looks back at that castle picture in this room full of Haberstrup, whatever it is, possessions closest to your soul. And she looks at the freaking painting and it's signed by A. Hitler. She looks horrified. And then the camera zooms out to the rest of the room. And this is where I was saying, it reminded me so much of Succession, where there was this Hitler-loving on-air personality. And Tom Wambsgans is like sitting down with him and he's like, so why did you get married at like Hitler's birth area? And then in the final season of Succession, they partner up with a neo-Nazi, like fascist guy who ultimately wins the presidency. So they're kind of playing with that same theme. Yaz is literally allowing, under the prestigious name of the Norton masthead, this Hitler-loving fascist to potentially publish his work under the guise of legacy media with the weight of what that carries.
And I think there's this realization moment she has when she's in the room that the mother has described as her favorite room with all of the possessions closest to her heart. I think she realizes at this point that it is not, in fact, Moritz who is running the show here, and his mother is just the one walking the dog, serving the wine, making up the rooms. She is, in fact, the true mastermind behind this and is letting everyone think, right? The classic trope of the woman letting the man think it's all him, all his idea is the way to get what she wants. Yasmin is trying to do this with Henry, being like, isn't this what you want, dear? Like, you really wanted to sleep with Haley, didn't you? Like, she's trying to pull the strings, but Johanna is the true puppet master, who is not only having her will exercised through her son, but also manipulating Yasmin in turn to now do her dirty work for her through giving her son his place in the legacy media, basically whitewashing this fascism or whatever it is that he wants to put out in the universe.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So from here, we then go to Fin Digest. So we're at the offices with Jim, and the boss mumbles, fucking James. He then opens the door, gets his attention, calls him in. In the background, you hear someone say 1,800 comments on this piece about parents helping their kids buy shoebox properties in London. Haven't had a post bag this full since that piece about the beauty of London mosques, which goes to the sort of affordability commentary. But anyway, so Jim walks in. The boss says, you asked for the right of reply. And Jim says, yes, haven't heard anything back yet, right? So he's sent the pre-publication questions to Tender, is waiting for them to come back. Jim says, why wait to publish? We know they're just going to say that the allegations are baseless. The boss then hands him the paper that is the article that James had written with some revisions. And he reads it. It says, Tender investigated high-growth fintech companies' results lack transparency and spooks investors. And then he's like, oh, fucking hell. Can't we be blunter? Right? Because he had said they were going to like sand down the language. He says, I mean, X porn payments company is still illegally processing porn payments. And the boss says, James, you failed to have noticed that the lawyers last night have actually, in addition to changing that language, taken out a large chunk of your copy. So he now looks through and there's just tons of stuff that's just blacked out. It's like all the redacted stuff where you get like from the government and there's just nothing you can even read. And he says, why are you so desperate to get this out half cooked? James says someone else is going to beat us to this. And the safer his man, so he has someone on the inside, the safer my man feels going on record, the faster we're going to get to the actual truth. He says, you know that this guy who he has is too intimidated to do it electronically. And so the boss then says, these guys are fucking litigious. And we saw that in the last episode or 2 episodes ago when they were just like, I don't care what the contracts say. Let your freaking lawyers fight with our lawyers. Like, as far as we're concerned, we're done. He says it goes out with the changes or it doesn't go out at all. And Jim is just like, fuck it, print it. But if you won't unlock budget for me to go to Accra, I guess I'm going to have to book my own ticket. So we know that his poor little piece has been sanded down. It's going out, but it's going down in a much less fanfare version.
There's going to be much less to it. And again, back to the Herbalife story, like that was the problem. There wasn't the smoking gun, even though again, you watch that documentary and you're like, God, there were smoking guns everywhere, but that like wasn't, it was like, there were pages and pages and pages of Bill Ackman being like, look, it's a pyramid scheme, but there wasn't like hey, here's a recording of the CEO, again, formerly, by the way, the CEO of Disney, who paid himself $90 million in 2011. This guy was the highest paid CEO in America at one point. But there wasn't like a smoking
Herbalife
gun.
was?
Yes.
But wait, so what did that have to do with Disney?
The guy was the former CEO of Disney before he became the CEO of Herbalife. And he was
but
like,
it's not Bob Iger.
And all this thing. No.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
But anyways, you really need that smoking gun. You can't just publish a bunch of things being like, oh, this stock might be over. Like no one cares.
But even this, I still don't know what the smoking gun is, that they're still.
So, I mean, let's talk about it because what I'm interpreting this to mean is, okay, it's not just X porn payments company still processing porn payments. To me, that's like not a big short idea. And that's not the kind of thing, to Jim's original warnings, that someone would cover up at all costs. So
Yeah.
I keep waiting for something more nefarious to be happening, because it's just like, hey, listen, this is how we got into business, but we're really trying to be something cleaner, bigger, better, this bank killer, whatever. But we're still doing this like dirty work or whatever. Okay, to me, that's not like a smoking gun. That's like your business model is just slightly different than you had hoped it to be. You can't get away from your original things. Now, we'll get to the field research that Harper and Sweet Pea are doing. But what we're finding out, to me, to your point, is, okay, I think in a lot of these African countries, we keep talking about Accra, which is Ghana. So like, I guess we're going to Ghana at some point or another. The thing that might be illegal is like processing porn payments in countries where that is illegal. So they are money laundering. Now, money laundering is a crime. So I think that's the crime that they are saying that they are doing.
Yeah.
If they're legal, they're just doing stuff that is not so great and like not aligned with their clean image. If they're illegal, they're money laundering, and that's a bad thing. And okay.
All right. So next scene, Harper and Sweet Pea are in Sunderland, and they talk about how it took them long to get there. I initially, my first read, thought they were like going to Africa, but no, they're in just like some random place in whatever, England, that they probably drove to instead of flying. So they knock on the door and a woman opens it, and Sweet Pea says that they are from the Office of National Statistics. And she says, we might have rung your bell by mistake, so forgive me. And the woman's like, oh, no worries. And Sweet Pea's like, oh, no, wait. And she's like, we're here because we're under the impression that this was an office. Is there anyone who works here? And the woman says her son. And so they go inside, and Harper and Sweet Pea are like standing over this like guy. And he's like explaining to them what he does. He says, so I get a ton of emails from various payment sites in Africa. He says the amounts, lots of attachments. And Sweet Pea says, can you show me one of them? He says, sure. And he opens it up and she says, transactions. He's like, how'd you know? Harper and Sweet Pea then give a look, and Sweet Pea asks, well, what do you do with them? He says, well, it's loads of transactions, all at different price points. I collate them and I bucket them based on the price point. Anything between 0 to 12 pounds gets labeled with this one code, PZ202, whereas if it's between 12 and 80, it gets labeled with PZ303, and so on and so forth. And then he shows them another spreadsheet with a pie chart. And Harper says, he's not building the charts in Tender's earning reports, is he? And Sweet Pea's like, Jeffrey, do you mind if I just note down some of those codes? And so then as they're walking outside, Sweet Pea says, so every one of Tender's available transactions is coded by hand by our gorgeous friend Jeffrey over here. By the way, he was not gorgeous. They must have a dozen Jeffreys coding by price point, not by origination of service. And Harper says, and that is how they're hiding the porn and the gambling, right? They're not recording it based on that name. They're just recording it based on price. Sweet Pea says, so if you buy hardcore porn or flowers for your nan, or you piss away your money at roulette, it's all categorized the same, as long as it costs roughly the same. It's just like one big bucket of slop called consumables. And Sweet Pea gets really excited. She's like, this was such a mental fucking buzz. And Harper says, Sweet Pea, come work with me, please. Sweet Pea says, Harper, you left Petra and you left Mostyn. I need your word that you will actually see this through. No distractions. Harper says, understood. If you come aboard, you have my word. Sweet Pea says, okay. They shake hands, and then Harper tells her to get Eric on the phone.
Harper sees in Sweet Pea what she's been longing for, someone who gets off on the mental buzz of uncovering these mysteries and being right. And so she is so much warmer and more willing to offer her a job than with Eric or with Kwabena. She feels this closeness to Sweet Pea, the other woman who doesn't leave money on the table. And I love the budding relationship between them. I'm actually really excited about this new evolution of Sweet Pea as Harper's bestie, especially because they got off on such a bad foot.
Yeah. I agree. So Harper then calls James and says, what if I told you that you were 100% correct on your tender payments laundering thesis? So the next scene, we're with Henry, Jennifer Bevan, and Lisa Durt. And Henry says, you'll no doubt remember, earlier this year, Lisa, your government promised to rip up the bureaucracy that blocks investment and urge the regulator, that's you, Colin, so we see this other dude, again, named Colin, to take growth seriously. Blocking this deal would break both of those promises. Whitney looks at him as he's talking. Henry continues. He says, global innovators, large and small, would take note, despite the Labour Party's often lofty rhetoric that the UK is closed for business. It would represent a major blow to UK citizens who currently at least remain largely in the dark about how parlous their economic circumstances really are. Lisa Dern then says, noblesse oblige. Jen, what the hell does that mean?
It basically means the obligation of people in a position of power to it's kind of like trickle down economics. It's like the people in positions of power have to go out and be leaders in the business world and produce and all these things. That there's this like obligation upon the upper class to be like the model for business and all these things. So
Got
it's like
it.
rich stuff coming from you, like more of the nobility of the UK saying that you're going to do all this work that's going to benefit the everyman.
Right. Oh, and that's exactly what she says. She says, aristocracy knows best type stuff. It's hard to stomach coming from you. People have short memories. I see my role in politics as maintaining a very long one. And that includes seeing through a charlatan's rebranding. I haven't forgotten making you squirm at the Lumi inquiry. So Whitney then says it would be an act of narcissism bordering on self-harm to allow personal history to deliver a fatal blow to what we're on the verge of achieving here. This merger will give us a banking license, which will mean more choice, lower prices, and a wave of innovation to follow in its slipstream. And then a man walks in, shaking people's hands and saying, Ricky Martin, but with a Y, because I think of like Ricky Martin, the singer.
It's just funny because there's 2 Y's in his name, right? Like,
true. Yeah, this is true. They say, Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. The floor is all yours. I'm all ears. Lisa does not look happy. And she says to Bevan, did you know about this? Bevan doesn't reply, but there's a newspaper that reads, Jennifer Bevan, Labor's next leader in waiting, which obviously has been printed by the Mostons, like this big,
Lord Norton, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, by Lord Norton. Dern then says, because she, by the way, sees this like newspaper.
She sees this and suddenly is like, oh shit, Jennifer has signed her deal with the devil. I'm screwed.
Yep. So Dern says, Ricky, thanks for stepping in. You interrupted and again, she's totally distracted by the headline in the newspaper. She's like, you interrupted my next question, which was to Colin. How does anything we've heard have any bearing on whether a merger with an Austrian banks represents an antitrust issue? Whitney pipes in and says, Colin, the complaints you've heard from our rivals are obfuscating their real fear. They're not scared of a reduction in competition. They're scared of an increase in it. Colin laughs. Whitney continues. He says, this is an objectively pro-competitive deal. Ferdinand says, Colin, Ricky, Jennifer, Lisa. And also to your point, interesting that Lisa is last. It's not just a question of whether Labor's Britain is pro-business, it's whether Labor is pro-reducing financial fraud, pro-teaching financial hygiene to its electorates, pro the consumer's agency in his own financial life. Your last government isolated you from Europe. I urge you to see this as a first of many necessary steps towards reintegration. Ferdinand then looking at Henry says, don't you think? Because by the way, Henry is like totally distracted. He's like totally out of it for some reason.
Henry completely got knocked out by Lisa reminding him, you're just a charlatan trying to rebrand himself. I see right
That's
through
what it was.
Henry has been triggered back into his like self, oh no, and he's wallowing in his own mind and looking off into space. He's totally defanged here and completely useless as CEO. And Ferdinand and Whitney are doing all the work.
Yeah. But Colin says, as I understand it, your securing of an Austrian banking license to trade in the EU will be followed by an application for a UK license. Whitney says, we're a UK company. And Colin continues, that's not how. And Ricky then just says, Colin, the PM wants it stated here how much he admires Tender's vision for making Britain the fintech capital of Europe, if not the world. And everyone just is like looking around. Ricky says, Lisa, we could sidebar with Colin about this later, I'm sure. And Ferdinand says, thank you, Ricky. Lisa looks at Jennifer like you just totally sold us out. So we now know that this is probably going to go through between Yaz orchestrating Moritz to get off whatever the table, but also like what Yaz had done getting Bevan in their pocket. Like she orchestrated that too. So
all Yasmin's dirty work, basically, by manipulating Jennifer, Lord Norton, and Otto Mostyn, by the way, who probably helped with the prime minister weighing in on this, because this guy who's the voice of the prime minister, remember Otto was being read in for some confirmation in political office. I forget his peerage or whatever it is.
Yep.
But so the poor regulator, Colin, cannot literally get a full sentence out in this meeting. Ricky Martin is here to save the day. And Lisa Dern has been totally defanged. So basically they're saying, we're going to fix this with the regulator. We're going to fix this. Like, don't worry about it. This is a done deal effectively.
Yeah.
And Whitney and everyone are all satisfied. And
Yeah. So the next scene, there's a big printed newspaper that we see reads, Tender joins the FTSE, which I like reminded me of our conversation with
share that
Charlie
story
Heaton.
For anyone who didn't see that.
Well, so we got to interview the cast on the red carpet, and we had asked Charles Heaton, what was it like doing this show where there's so much finance? And he's like, yeah, I would read these lines and I'd be like, the FTSE. And they'd be like, no, it's the FTSE. So it just made us so excited. We're like, when we had this. So you can check it out on our Instagram. We have that video up there. But anyway, so it reads, Tender joins the FTSE 100 in the wake of the IBM Bauer deal. Henry then picks up his small cell phone, by the way, because like you have the big one, which is like this big news for Tinder. And then there's on the small little phone, right? It's the Fin Digest article that says Tinder investigated. Like it's like womp womp.
It is such a great side by side, right? He's got the big legacy media paper in his left hand. And underneath that big headline, it says Digital Bank's FTSE debut marks major milestone for UK fintech. So it's all positive news from the legacy media here. And then on the little tiny screen is the already redacted new
sanded down
article, if you will. Yeah, exactly. That doesn't really have much impact.
Yep. So Henry says to Yaz as she walks into the office, Whitney was right. The Fin Digest piece reads like sensationalist nonsense to manipulate the share price. He then hands Yaz the paper with the article, which reads the case for benevolent dictatorship, which is clearly written by this guy.
Yes, he flips to the opinion section of the exact same newspaper with Maritz's article.
Yes. And then says, I guess this is why Moritz backed out of like trying to fight. Yaz says, yeah, Alexander put me in touch with Percy in the opinion pages. And Henry says, you went behind my back to my uncle to give this guy a platform? And Yaz says, Alexander agreed with me. Henry, it's soft skill negotiation. And Henry says, this isn't some crank writing in The Spectator in defense of what March or something?
The Wehrmacht. It's Germany's war defense platform in World War II.
Got it. He says, this is a national newspaper with responsibility. And Yaz says, he's a kook running his mouth. Henry says, it's tomorrow's fucking chip paper. Don't be so naive. I can't believe you gave him a platform in my uncle's newspaper that does carry weight and that influences people. We've given a Nazi this megaphone. So Yaz then says, don't you think you should be thanking me? This deal wouldn't have gone through without me giving Moritz this opportunity. And Henry says, what you did with Haley didn't feel right. Now talking about like this weird sex situation. And he says, you know, I'm an addict. It felt very enabler-like. Yaz says, you wanted her, so you fucked her. I was just bold enough to know what to give you.
Yasmin is gaslighting Henry here. She's like, you wanted her. You did it. Like, this was all you. You had all the agency here. And no, he didn't.
Yeah. Haley walks in and he says, your morning's pretty stacked. I booked a car, whatever. So Yaz then says, do you want to join us for a nightcap, Haley? I mean, there are some introductions that we could make for you. Haley says, I have plans, but I could cancel. And Henry says, no, keep your plans. Again, he like, this is not what he wants. Right. And he then like smiles at her like, thanks. And Yaz and Haley kind of look at each other and are like, okay. But
Yaz is like, sorry, I tried.
Yeah.
Trying to keep this going.
Yes. And Henry then says, who the fuck did I marry? And Yaz replies, shouldn't you know that, darling? And so that's when, again, the Sail Away song, by the way, comes back on after that.
It likes surround sound.
Yeah. And so the next scene where Harper is also reading the article, but again, on her phone, Sweet Pea says, the Fin Digest article hasn't been as stock negative as I'd hope, which like kind of duh. Harper says, the market will eventually be forced to price tender as deception and they will be punished for it. Eric says, no guarantee. The Sunderland Discovery puzzle piece is useless to the market without the full image. It's as good as a hunch without a groundswell of investor sentiment behind it. I thought the trader you hired was supposed to be there. And so like, we know that she's hired some trader. Again, we have theories about who it is. Harper looks around because he's not there. Eric then says, I agreed to Pierre's terms, by the way. Harper says, I told you I didn't want that from you. And Eric says, well, you have it. I gave it to you. And all that I ask is we widen the perimeter of what we consider acceptable discourse between us. I won't hurt you just by knowing you. Harper says, I really appreciate your financial backing and I will break my back to ensure that your faith is rewarded. But it's already a miracle that you and I are in any position to be working together again. And we both know that nothing good comes from us being any more intimate than that. And Eric looks like gutted. And by the way, so Kenny shows up and they shake hands and Eric says, Deutsche, Goldman spit you out? Kenny says, well, the universe has quiet designs to keep us humble. Just come this way. And so they're walking into this office and Harper says, so we'd like to place a short with you, which by the way, is like similar to what they did last season with only that time it was Goldman. Kenny says, buy side's full of tyrants who deny their tyranny and the sell side full of slaves who deny their servitude. Somewhere in the middle, all human life. Harper says, right. Kenny then asks Eric, how does it feel to finally have the power? And Eric says, a constant nerve-jangling desire to enshrine it. And Kenny then laughs. We then hear Kwabena show up and say, Harp, and he runs after her, again, apologizing for being late. So I feel like his like lack of punctuality is sort of a character trait. Eric asks, this your man? Which, you know, you can kind of take in more ways than one.
There, yeah.
Yeah. Harper says yes. They shake hands. And then as they all get in the elevator, Eric says, Kenny, I'm just glad I got the chance to say that I'm sorry. I am sorry. Because remember, in season 3, I mean, obviously, season 1, Kenny was terrible. He was an alcoholic. By season 2, he got sober. He was constantly trying to apologize to Yaz, constantly trying to do good. And then in season 3, we found out that Eric had a drinking problem,
Kenny
got him
took Eric
sober.
under his wing.
Yeah, Kenny took Eric under his wing, got him sober, and then Eric just completely fucked him over and like fired him. So now they're back together. And again, I think Eric has found, I mean, he's probably not, I mean, we haven't seen him drinking, right? The way that we did in last season.
Eric seems really healthy.
Eric seems really healthy. And so he's apologizing. And Kenny says, well, it's not the worst thing anyone's ever done. He then smiles at him and we hear door closing. And then the sail away, sail away.
But also,
sail
Eric
away.
looks like, huh? Like
Yeah.
confused at the end because remember, they've all been equally terrible to each other. So Kenny has already exacted his revenge by helping Harper execute the giant short against Pierpoint that cost Eric his job. So they are all equally complicit. And to your point, remember season 1, Kenny was like a terrible, terrible dude. There are no saints and sinners here. This is a very good reminder that there are no actual good guys in this elevator, except for Quavada.
I actually, Kenny though, he has had a full redemption story. The only thing he did is that he basically, with by the way, who was the one in season 1? The other,
Daria.
Jackie. No. At Goldman, it was Jackie. It was Kenny.
Daria.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said Dern. Sorry, yes,
No.
Jackie, Kenny, and Daria. That they all took revenge. But I mean, that wasn't him being bad. That was him just being like, sure, I will help you short Pierpoint. By the way, like
also this whole thing of like going into offices to be like, I would like to enact a short. I love how they make it this like big dramatic meeting where they do like, I mean, they probably do have this electronically.
yeah. So, all right. So who are we bullish and who are we bearish on, Jen?
Gosh, I'm bullish on just about everyone. I think the only person I'm bearish on at this point is Jim Dycker. He's about to go off to Ghana without the support of his editor to dig up more stuff. And poor Henry Muck. It just, Henry Muck doesn't know what he got himself into. He's being totally outfoxed and outmaneuvered here and having all his puppet strings pulled by Yasmin. But I want to see where everyone's going.
Me too. I'm bearish. I think only on Rishi, and I want to be bullish on Henry, but I'm not. I'm bearish on Henry. And then everybody else bullish. So this was so fun. There was so much in this episode. We have no idea what's to come with the next episode. So we will see. We're along for the ride with you. But reminder, we are going to be trying to shift away from posting on the big channel. So if you have not yet followed our smaller HBO industry podcast on YouTube, you can do that. We also do post video to Spotify. So you can actually watch us having a conversation on Spotify. And thank you guys so much. And we will see you next week.
Bye.